All right, well, good morning. We call this meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee to order. This is our July meeting. Doing a nose count here in the building, so we do have a forum. We can advance, take action on our action items. I'd like to go around the room and do self-introductions, and then we will do the same thing following that for those committee members who are joining us virtually. So why don't we start over here? If you tell us who you are and whom you represent.
Sure. Hi, I'm Melissa Spelback. I was appointed by Councilman Dave Miller.
I'm Don Skelton, and I was appointed by Port Tampa.
Amy Espinosa, at large, representing women.
I'm Bill Roberts. I was appointed by the Aviation Authority.
I am Rich Clarendon on the staff to this committee.
Terrence Trott, African American at large representative.
Good morning, Nicholas Glover, I was appointed by Mark.
Beatrice Lockford, the under 30 at large representative.
Very good. All right. And do we have committee members joining us virtually? I don't have a screen to monitor.
Yeah, Chair, this is Rick Fernandez. I'm at-large Hispanic rep.
Thank you, Rick. Other committee members?
Stephen.
Oh, yeah, we had a couple.
Stephen?
Yeah, hey guys, this is Stephen Hollenkamp, City of Plant City.
Thank you.
And here's Barbara Kennedy Gibson for the school district.
Thank you, Laura.
Hi, Miaza Morrison's on, appointed by Harry Cohen.
Yeah, good. Welcome. Thank you. Anyone else?
I think Carolyn is Carolyn Brown is trying to tune in. She's having connectivity problems. We're trying to get that sorted out.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank those of you in the room here today. Morning, Hoyt. The name badges are for the name plates are outside the door in the lobby. Pick a seat and join us. Give Lloyd a moment to get settled.
There's a table way down there if you'd like to sit at your own table. Otherwise, you can sit right here.
Amy may disagree with that, sorry. I'll go to the back here.
Hey, Rich. Hey, Rich, we can see your computer screen still.
Thanks.
Okay. The second item on our agenda is the chairman's request, the speaker's address, the chair, and going to be recognized. The next item is the public comment. Do we have anybody wishing to make public comment? Anyone has indicated so online. There's no one here in the building to make public comment.
I don't see any hands raised, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Public comment. Going once. All right, hearing none, we will close the portion of the meeting for public comment and move on to the members' interests. This is a section where committee members have the ability to suggest items they would like to see on future agendas. Are there any comments from members' interest from those of you here in the room? And then I'll move to those online. Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't even know if this is possible, but it's just something I noticed lately, just in my neighborhood in particular. Some of the seats at the bus stops have disappeared. So I'm interested, I don't know if we have a representative that can, for HART, that can bring that forward. But I'm interested to understand if they're going to be replaced or why these seats are all of a sudden missing from a whole slew of buses.
Okay. Nick, that's not a high priority, but if you can look into it, I appreciate it.
No, it is a priority.
Yeah, mostly on Nebraska Avenue. Oh, you're there at Park.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I didn't even catch
okay.
that when we went around.
Big lovers.
Thank you, Nicholas. I appreciate it.
I think we will have somebody tuning in part, so you might want to make sure you heard that
Yeah,
comment.
the Hart representative. Are there member, Terrence Scott, you have a member's interest?
Along the same lines, I can't remember if we were supposed to have someone from Hart talk about a program they were doing. I can't recall, but there was some, there's in the Progress Village area, especially, I noticed a few, just like bus stops, just a bench, just sitting out there in the middle of the sun. I'd like to see what we can do about getting some of those covered up. I mean, if you want people to take the bus, it has to be, you know, comfortable in some sort. So I don't know. So I'm thinking back as to a presentation because I think I held it back before because somebody was going to come talk about a program that they were doing where they were checking on that maybe. But if not, I'd like to bring it to the forefront.
Okay.
Because I'm sure it's in other areas as well.
If there is a Hart representative online virtually, I would appreciate it if they make note to look into Terrence's request and see if you can get some information back to us. Are there members' interest items that committee members who are virtually online would like to bring up? Looking for hands. Can't see everyone, so I don't know. If you have an interest item, go ahead and speak up. Hearing none, we'll assume there are no others. Thanks for those two comments. Appreciate it. The next item on our agenda is the single action item for today. We do have a quorum here in the building, which is required now under state and federal regulations. So I will recognize Joshua and Dana for the non-discrimination and equity plan report. Are you folks ready?
Hey, everybody. Rich, will you be sharing the slides or would you like to give me a presenter?
You can, if you have them up, you can advance your own slides.
I do have them up, but I am not able to share my screen right now.
Michael, can you make him the presenter? Yeah.
Good.
All right, hey everybody, Josh Barber here with Planned Hillsborough staff, and I'm joined by Dana Lazarus. We're here to present the 2021 update of the Non-Discrimination and Equity Plan. There is a link to the full document in your agenda packet. I do hope that you all have had some time to review it, and we'll spend the next 20 minutes or so just kind of walking through the document. Providing a summary of it. We're happy to take comments and questions after, and we'll be asking for an approval and forwarding to the TPO board. So I want to go over a little bit of a background on this project. As a recipient of federal dollars through the FDOT and up from USDOT, the TPO is required to comply with Title VI and other non-discrimination regulations. And we demonstrate this compliance through our Title VI Non-Discrimination and Equity Plan. And so every 3 years is considered a best practice for updating this document. The last one was adopted in 2018. And so as we were planning last year in 2020 to update this document, the renewed interest in equity and racial justice and civil rights nationwide led to executive leadership here at the TPO and the Planning Commission to request that the document be expanded to include the Hillsborough City County Planning Commission as well. And while Federal Highway does not consider the
Joshua, you're kind of breaking up.
a recipient.
Yeah, you have,
You're gonna have to.
Yeah.
Rich might have to type to him.
Ultimately, they do have a
Joshua, we can't hear you. You can hear us.
Josh, we completely lost the audio. We've heard none of your presentation for the last minute and a half.
I'm guessing that maybe his screen is frozen as well on his end.
Dana, you may be up to bat sooner than you expected.
Dana, do you want to see if we can pick up where Josh left off?
I can try. I will have to be able to share my screen, and I have to actually open the presentation. One sec.
clear.
Maybe if you turn on video.
Yeah. Chairman,
Sure.
did we do the approval of the minutes? All right. I might have fallen asleep for a second. All right.
We're just not hearing any of that.
So I'm being asked to show my screen, but I can't right now because I have to actually open the presentation, and that's going to take me a minute.
Compliant and planning commissions with federal rights law, regulations, and executive orders. But also, this document really furthered the coordination of land use, transportation.
Well, that was quick.
Can you all hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you now, but we didn't hear after about the first minute or so of your presentation.
Wonderful. Okay. I apologize, everyone. My network connections, I guess, decided to go haywire.
You might want to try closing your incoming video. If you'd like, I can. We were going to see if Dana could pull up the presentation, but I could do as well.
All right.
Rich, would you mind doing that?
Not at all.
Thank you.
Trying to free up some bandwidth myself.
Okay, Michael, if you could make you the presenter again, we'll try to run the show from this end.
Oh, wait, 1 second.
All right. I can see your screen now, Rich.
Let me go down a slide or two. I think this is where you left off.
Okay. All right. Let me give it another shot, y'all. I apologize. So I'm going to walk you all through a bit through the document. First thing, I want to provide a bit of a background on this project. The TPO is a recipient of federal dollars passed through the Florida Department of Transportation. And as a requirement of that, we're required to demonstrate our compliance with federal civil rights legislation. And so an update of this plan is considered best practice to be updated every 3 years. And the last one was adopted in 2018. And so with 2020 coming around and the renewed interest in equity and civil rights and racial justice across the country, executive leadership of Plan Hillsborough decided to request that this plan be expanded to include the City County Planning Commission. And while the Federal Highway Administration does not consider the Planning Commission a recipient of federal dollars, there are a lot of reasons to expand this plan to include the Planning Commission and ensure that they're demonstrating their compliance with civil rights legislation. Chiefly, the Planning Commission has a staff services agreement with the TPO, which requires them to comply with Title VI and other non-discrimination regulations. And the Planning Commission and the TPO share resources across agencies. This includes shared staff, as well as shared dollars across the agency. And so the decision was made to expand this plan to demonstrate both the TPO's and the Planning Commission's compliance with civil rights law, regulations, and executive orders. And in addition, this plan has benefits such as facilitating the coordination of land use and transportation across our agencies, and allowing Plan Hillsborough to speak with one voice and provide very clear public service in the realm of non-discrimination. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what laws and orders this plan specifically demonstrates our compliance with. This includes the Civil Rights Act of 1964, specifically Title VI of that, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. The Rehabilitation Act in 1973, specifically Section 504 of that, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. The Highway Act added sex as a protected class. The Age Discrimination Act, self-evident. The Civil Rights Restoration Act clarified congressional intent to include all parts of any agency that receives federal financial assistance. And then, of course, the ADA in 1990. The executive orders that we demonstrate compliance with include the one on environmental justice, which requires us to assess the potential for disparate impacts on low-income and minority communities and identify mitigation measures where disparate impacts are found. And then the executive order on limited English proficiency, which requires us to ensure access for those who are limited English proficient. And then, of course, the regulations as passed down through the USDOT. Next slide, please. And so the basic non-discrimination assurance that the agency is required to provide to the public, to our partners, is that no person shall, on the grounds of these following characteristics, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or otherwise be subjected to discrimination or retaliation under any of our programs or activities. And to achieve this, we assure to the public, to the FDOT and the USDOT, that we'll participate in trainings on these topics, have a process to collect and map different groups across the county, take reasonable steps to provide meaningful access to those with disabilities and who are limited English proficient, that will have methodologies to prevent disparate impacts or disproportionate burdens on our low-income and minority communities from our plans and our projects, and other more administrative tasks as well. Next slide, please. And so the basic purpose of this plan, just to make it clear, is to demonstrate our compliance with the acts, orders, and regulations relating to non-discrimination. But the plan also takes it a step further and recognizes that, you know, non-discrimination legislation has not resulted in an equitable society, and that we need to take these regulations a step further and advance equitable processes and just outcomes above and beyond federal and state requirements. Next slide, please. And so a quick overview of the report. Those are kind of the introduction sections. These next 7 sections we'll be going over a little bit more. The first 3 demonstrate the Planning Commission's and the TPO's compliance with civil rights regulations. And the next 4 sections, the framework, the history, our public engagement, and our recommendations really seek to advance equity and just outcomes above and beyond the federal and state requirements. Next slide, please. And so part 1 of the plan is our Title VI and non-discrimination components. Section 1 provides a demographic overview of our county and maps of different concentrations of different groups across the county, as well as dot density maps of those same groups. 2 different methodologies to better understand who lives where in Hillsborough County. Part 2 looks at community engagement, access, and representation. This includes how we provide translation and interpretation services for those who are LEP or those who have a disability, what steps we take to ensure that our services are accessible to those with disabilities. It also talks about efforts we make through the strategic plan to facilitate community partnerships. And the next section, section 3, looks at how we evaluate equity needs and outcomes in our plans. This is primarily done through GIS modeling, looking at overlay analysis and providing related figures, showing, the distribution of project benefits and burdens across the county. We also do that through the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Model, where we, give the model, here are our environmental justice areas, and it'll tell us, how the long-range transportation plan, the spatial distribution of benefits and burdens within that. Section 4 looks at how we evaluate our outreach effectiveness. These are documented through the TPO's Measures of Effectiveness report. And then, of course, the Plan Hillsborough Strategic Plan as well shows how we evaluate our outreach effectiveness also. Section 5 provides an overview of our organizational staffing and structure, and it lays out the requirements and responsibilities of our executive directors, of our civil rights officer, and our staff in complying with Title VI and other non-discrimination regs. Next slide, please. Part 2 looks at how the TPO has integrated equity into our primary program areas, including the LRTP, the TIP, our system and corridor planning, and our public participation, and our regional coordination. Next slide, please. And a few highlights of how the TPO has integrated equity into our primary program areas. The 2045 LRTP did an environmental justice analysis, which found the potential for disparate health and environmental impacts as a result of increased traffic and right-of-way acquisition on environmental justice communities. Most recent TIP, which went before y'all's board last month or 2 months ago, evaluated the distribution of project miles in the TIP by funding bucket in low-income, racialized communities, and ethnic communities compared to county-wide. The 2020 Vision Zero Speed Management Plan also, for example, the project manager used our communities of concern maps to help prioritize corridors and subsequently projects in those areas. And it also established safeguards against inequitable enforcement practices and asked us to develop a metric to further examine that. And then, of course, I would be remiss without mentioning the resolution on racial justice that this committee put together and was ultimately adopted by the TPO board as well, which really is kind of helped advance our practice and pushed us to continue this work. I'm going to hand it off to Dana to talk about the Planning Commission's work a little bit now. Next slide.
Thanks, Josh. So I did a review of equity and non-discrimination work in the Planning Commission's plans and processes. So that includes the update and review of the comprehensive plans of all 4 jurisdictions, the update of community plans, and special area studies that are carried out as directed by the Planning Commission. Next slide, please. Thank you. The first thing I want to highlight is in the unincorporated Hillsborough County's comprehensive plan is what they call the EDGE, or the Economically Disadvantaged Groups element. It includes a study of conditions at the time the plan was written, which was 2008, analyzing data on things like average household income, conditions of the county's housing stock, employment data, and vehicle ownership. It also includes objectives and policies designed to improve the quality of life for economically disadvantaged populations by addressing the specific needs of different underserved demographics and neighborhoods. For example, policy 1.2 in the EDGE restricts undesirable land uses like landfills and jails from being predominantly located in low-income areas. Next, as I was looking through the 3 cities' comprehensive plans, I found that in almost every element of all 3 plans, there are at least 1 or 2 goals, objectives, or policies that either prioritize underserved communities for consideration or investment, or address the specific needs of underserved communities, such as the housing needs of the elderly or disabled. This likely helped the plans actually receive recognition by the APA for sustainability because they were addressing the social pillar of sustainability. Next, the Ebor City Vision 2020 Master Plan update is highlighted because it was initiated by a community group, the Ebor City Development Corporation. So Ebor City is an historic neighborhood that is experiencing a lot of growth and development, and this community group wanted to have a say in how the growth and development will happen. Finally, the Brandon Corridors and Mixed Use Centers pilot project used some best practices to identify hubs where mixed use development could be encouraged in order to increase density and improve walkability, thereby improving bicycle and pedestrian access and safety and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide.
And so these first 3 sections really demonstrate the TPO's and the Planning Commission's compliance with Title VI and subsequent non-discrimination regulations. These next 4 sections are really intended to help advance equity within the agency and to better help the agency and the public better understand what equity means. One of the first things we really wanted to do was define equity and develop a framework for equity. One of the great places to start, of course, is with existing Title VI regs. But unfortunately, Title VI and the other non-discrimination regulations really only focus on distribution of benefits and burdens in our projects. And it fundamentally fails to recognize the historical and current inequities that we face today. So, when a Title VI asks us to, address disproportionate burdens or ensure that no one is denied the benefits of our planning projects, are we fundamentally addressing the existing inequities that exist? And so given that shortcoming of Title VI, we looked at frameworks for equity across the nation, and this one was developed by researcher Seth Lowe. It includes, of course, the essential cornerstone of Title VI, which is examining the distribution of benefits and burdens of our projects, and procedure as well, looking at how decisions are made and who makes them and who is involved. But the other 3 components that are not really addressed in Title VI or its regulations is this component of recognition. So looking at historical and current inequities and really critically examining the systems that uphold those inequities. It also doesn't consider the quality of interpersonal interactions and relationships, this component of interaction and how we engage with the public about these topics. And then it doesn't address the issues of care and repair, looking at the maintenance and upkeep of public spaces and the non-governmental systems of support that are created between agencies, between individuals. Next slide, please. And so to help really get to the heart of this issue of recognition, staff really wanted to look at the history of discrimination and planning practice across Hillsborough County. We looked at local, state, and national law and politics. We looked at public and private housing, such as the Homeowners Loan Corporation. We looked at comprehensive planning and zoning, so the first comp plans adopted by the cities of Hillsborough County. We looked at urban renewal and what projects were funded where across the county, and highway construction as well, where these projects were located, who they impacted. And it's really essential for us to understand this history as, you know, what ultimately led to the civil rights legislation that we have today, to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, to the Fair Housing Act in 1968. And it is essential for us to address this history in our work and use this history to inform our planning practices moving forward. We certainly don't exist in a world that is devoid of the impacts of historical planning. And it is only through understanding this history that we are going to be able to fundamentally tackle the inequities that we see today. And so really, I want to hand it off to Dana now to talk about our public engagement. And there's really these kind of three components that are going to be used to inform our recommendations. Next slide.
Thank you. So meaningful public engagement with underserved communities is a key component of equitable urban planning. Public engagement has long been a requirement of the planning process, but equitable public engagement makes an intentional effort to ensure that engagement does not passively exclude underserved, underrepresented people. While in the past, certain demographics like women and Black people, for example, were directly excluded from participating. These days, exclusion tends to be passive, as it is often more difficult for marginalized people to access the planning process. For the public engagement for this plan, we demonstrated how some methods to ensure engagement with underserved people occurs by making an intentional effort to engage traditionally underrepresented demographics through some of our methods. We wanted to understand the access and discrimination challenges that underserved people in Hillsborough County are facing and ask them their ideas of solutions for what we can do to address those challenges. So we used 4 methods of engagement. One method was an online survey, which we primarily sent out to community groups. We also did field outreach and verbally conducted the survey, where we went out to low-income communities of color around the county, which we identified using the maps that Joshua described earlier. We also held a virtual storytelling forum where we asked open-ended questions in order to learn additional information that may not have been captured in the survey. Finally, we held 5 focus groups to ensure the participation of 5 key traditionally underrepresented demographics, specifically low-income people, LGBTQ people, disabled folks, Black and African Americans, and Hispanics and Latinos. To make this process successful, we engaged with some amazingly supportive community partners I wanted to mention: the Corporation to Develop Communities of Tampa, the Waimama CDC, and Metro Inclusive Health partnered with us to put on the storytelling forum. Enterprising Latinas passed out flyers and helped us get input from the Spanish-speaking community. 200 Muslim Women Who Care is an awesome organization that we discovered through this process. They actually conducted their own access needs and challenges focus group of Muslim women, and our relationship with them led to a fantastic staff training on the basics of the Islam faith and access needs of Muslim women, which actually took place last month. USF's Cutter helped us design the survey, and a USF Master of Urban and Regional Planning class helped us analyze some of the public engagement results. Next slide. So this public engagement process produced several key themes around challenges that underserved people face in accessing these 4 main topic areas that we focused on: transportation, housing, other important community elements, and community engagement opportunities. The overarching theme that emerged is that people feel that more investment is being made in wealthy white communities than in low-income Black, Hispanic, and Latino communities, and they feel powerless to change that. People observed that racial and class segregation and displacement persist today, and that life for low-income individuals is made more difficult largely by the county's car-centric transportation system and a lack of political power. So more specifically, on the topic of transportation, people said that they want to walk and bike more, but are scared for their lives. They seek safe, walkable, bikeable, transit-accessible communities when looking for a place to live, but because prices are going up and in the urban core and wages are stagnant, they end up being displaced to the suburbs where transportation and community elements are even more difficult to access. The neighborhoods that they can afford to live in are burdened by trash, overgrown trees, unclean water, and a lack of beautification elements like neighborhood entryways. Finally, one of the biggest themes identified as a challenge to accessing political power is that people do not trust the government, and the feeling of powerlessness on top of other access issues, such as meetings being at the wrong time of day or being too far away, ends up deterring folks from participating in planning and other government processes. So some key ideas about solutions to transportation challenges included investment in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, investing in public transportation, primarily the bus system, as there are already people today who rely on the bus, and investing in traffic calming devices, particularly speed bumps, which were mentioned 59 times in the data. Key solutions to the affordable housing crisis and housing discrimination issues included a focus on increasing affordable housing in dense urban cores and focusing on revitalization policies to counter gentrification. This means that while we should prioritize multifamily housing and investment in underserved communities, we must also ensure that these things are done in tandem with community benefits policies like job training programs and the provision of affordable housing in order to keep people from being displaced and allowing them to actually access the benefits of improved facilities. People also asked for better access to information on what affordable housing and first-time home buyer programs already exist. They also had many new policy ideas around things like community land trust programs and developer regulations. Another overarching solution to improve access and quality of life was to ensure dense infill development that provides key community elements that like quality parks, grocery stores, and government access hubs within walking distance throughout underserved neighborhoods around the county. Finally, folks had some fantastic ideas about how to better reach them, with most of those ideas boiling down to building genuine relationships with underserved people and bringing engagement and important decision-making processes closer to where people live, or meeting them where they're at and allowing them to speak for themselves, particularly by implementing field engagement methods such as door knocking and tabling at community hotspots, like what we did for this engagement process. Next slide. Which now brings us to the section of our non-discrimination and equity plan that provides recommendations that Plan Hillsborough can implement to advance equity through our work. These recommendations were derived from a combination of the aforementioned public engagement, staff interviews, and best practices research. The plan proposes recommendations for the entire agency and recommendations specific to the TPO and Planning Commission staff. Next slide, please. The TPO and Planning Commission share administrative and public engagement processes and staff and often coordinate resources and expertise. So these are some of the main areas where we've made some agency-wide recommendations. The first key area we focus on is in the area of human resources, with things like hiring, representation, transparency, and training policies. For example, one recommendation is removing the requirement that all job applicants have a driver's license. Another is to do regular mandated diversity and civil rights trainings with all staff. Another subset of recommendations focuses on ensuring that a meaningful effort is made by staff and consultants to engage underserved demographic groups and neighborhoods. To that end, one recommendation is to expand the TPO's public participation plan to cover the Planning Commission. This will help the agency coordinate and standardize procedures for doing things like providing translated outreach materials and adding a procedural step in planning studies that involves overlaying study area maps with our underserved community maps in order to tailor engagement processes to reach the underserved communities that live in that area. Another key recommendation is, again, meeting people where they're at by increasing the use of field outreach engagement methods and improving access by continuing to conduct meetings and events in a hybrid format. Along the lines of leveraging technology to improve access, another key recommendation is to identify a way to consolidate outreach information through an app or text messaging platform. Finally, we recommend strategies that improve how the TPO works together with the Planning Commission and with other jurisdictions to tackle equity issues together. For example, by doing regular equity updates with the boards, hosting equity-focused meetups, data sharing, and ensuring that communication from the public is properly distributed so that it's heard and addressed by the appropriate agency. Because we're all going to have to work together to tackle the intersecting equity issues and have an impact. Next slide.
And so we developed 5 major recommendations for the TPO as well, specifically. The first major recommendation is for us to evaluate existing transportation conditions as they relate to equity, and also to evaluate the impacts of our plans and projects on those same communities. This includes items such as looking at changes in the Tampa Bay regional planning model to produce more useful outputs for environmental justice analysis, continuing to expand our equity-related measures in the State of the System report. We have a few already, such as crash rates and air quality, but continuing to use the performance-based planning program to advance equity. One of the big things we're really looking forward to as part of the next long-range transportation plan update is conducting an equity-related needs assessment to inform those projects and the prioritization of those projects. Looking at, when we're conducting planning studies, documenting and recognizing instances of historical discrimination in those communities and addressing the impacts and legacy of that. And then, of course, continuing to measure the distribution of funding and projects across environmental justice and Title VI areas in both the TIP, like we've done, but also the LRTP. The next major recommendation really builds upon this evaluation, looking towards prioritizing projects in Title VI, environmental justice communities, in all of our program areas. So continuing to do that in the LRTP. We did that for the Real Choices When Not Driving funding bucket as part of the 2045 update. But what kind of methodology should we use to prioritize projects in the other funding buckets? And then using that to inform our prioritization methodologies in the TIP as well, and then in all other TPO project areas. There's also a recommendation to explore participatory budgeting for the LRTP and the TIP, where dedicated funding is set aside for community members, community groups to decide what projects they want to see in their communities. And of course, encouraging public requests for studies as well as part of the Unified Planning Work Program update. Next slide, please. The next 3 recommendations, one is to continue to reduce the focus of enforcement as a means of achieving Vision Zero. Our current Vision Zero program does recognize and address the potential for the disparate impacts of enforcement in low income and minority communities. and continuing to expand that that focus and refocus really our efforts on infrastructure and design policies as well, as we know that often enforcement tactics disproportionately impact primarily Black and African American communities. The next major recommendation requests that the TPO advisory committees evaluate representation. Part 1 of this report provides a breakdown of all of our committees and the TPO board and the Planning Commission along the basis of gender, race, and ethnicity, age, disability, and income. So encouraging our advisory committees to examine that, consider the need for new seats to better ensure a good representation of Hillsborough County on those advisory committees, but also looking at removing seats, especially technical seats from non-technical committees that may be better suited for something like the TAC. And then also removing barriers to committee membership. One big thing is that committee applications currently require you to disclose whether or not you have a felony conviction. And as we look towards more restorative justice approaches, is that question really necessary for an advisory committee? And then continuing to expand and support multimodal transportation projects and agencies as well. Next slide, please. And together, these really, kind of summarize our recommendations for the TPO and the Planning Commission, or in the entire agency. We're happy to take any questions and comments, and we'd like to ask this board to approve the 2021 Non-Discrimination and Equity Plan and forward it on to the TPO for approval, adoption.
Thank you, Josh and Diana. That was a very comprehensive and excellent report. So we're being asked as a committee to forward this recommendation on to the TPO. Are there questions or comments from the committee members? I'll start here in the room. Amy?
Yes, my question is, you have mentioned measurements. So as you guys implement this plan in the next 3 years, I understand, can you give me like an overview of how those measurements are taken so you know you're moving in the right direction towards your goals?
Yeah, I think, after once we hit 2024, and we look towards the next plan update, there'll be an assessment of, what we have moved forward with, what we haven't moved forward with. I think there's a lot of stuff that's kind of low-hanging fruit. Removing the felony question from the committee applications, for example, is something we can do kind of immediately. But then there's other recommendations like the equity needs assessment as part of the LRTP that, just given the cycle of the LRTP update, we may not have gotten to yet. So what I would hope for moving forward is kind of a tracking sheet. And then one of the major recommendations also is to provide regular equity updates to our boards and committees. So doing so on an annual basis, coming here and kind of letting you all know, what we have done and what we are moving forward with currently.
I would just add that there are specific plans and places, work products that the TPO produces, like the State of the System report, where we are including certain equity measures that actually compare the distribution of benefits and burdens, as well as in the annual TIP and LRTP. So as each of these work products come out, the recommendation is to include a section, at minimum, like a section to measure equity impacts and the current conditions at the time.
Terrence, Sean, do you have a question?
Good.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I just wanted to know if there's any plan to follow up with people that participated, and to get us to this point, so that way, we can see like how their attitudes have changed over time.
That's a really interesting question. throughout this process, so, since last December when we started collecting public engagement input, anyone who has provided their contact information or has participated in the survey or the focus group or the storytelling forum, I have been sending emails to and making phone calls to and keeping them up to date on the status of the plan. They were all invited to come speak at today's CAC meeting, but we were really trying to get folks to come out to the TPO board meeting and the planning commission meeting to give a public comment if they would like to. But what I think you're asking is more about follow-up in the coming years, like as part of like that performance measurement step maybe. And is that what you're thinking of?
Yes.
That's a really cool idea. And, ongoing engagement is a really important part of all of this. And so I'll definitely put some good thought into how, to maybe have focus groups again with the same people and like you said, see if the attitudes have changed. That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I was just piggybacking off of, I think, what Amy kind of was asking to know, we know things will be happening, but are those things that are happening actually making a positive impact? So thank you.
Yeah, and to that end, qualitative research is really important. And with some of these engagement methods that are being recommended, hopefully more qualitative studies can be performed where we can get more information about attitudes and perceptions over time. That was included in the survey was, again, attitudes and perceptions. So we might be able to measure if there's a difference.
Amy, you have a question?
And I just wanted to add to that dialogue, is that I also think that it's important to understand what doesn't work as well as what is working. So I don't know if there is a plan for that somewhere, but that would be, I think, important information.
Thank you. Other comments from committee members online? Anyone? Mr. Fernandez is recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Again, Dana, Josh, thank you so much for the presentation. You were good enough to come and talk to us last month, and it was equally well done today, so thank you. My question has to do with the evaluation of, I think you termed it the technical seats on the various advisory boards. And if I understood correctly, I think your discussion went so far as to also include technical seats on the big board as well. Could you put a little meat on the bones for that for us, please? I mean, you could use the CAC you're talking to right now as an example. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but that's kind of what God put me here for, so I'm going to do it. What type of seat would you think should not be on the CAC or on the TPO big board?
So we didn't address the TPO big board because those seats are spelled out in interjurisdictional agreements as well as state law. It was something that when we originally set out, we wanted to make some recommendations about the big board. But as we continue to examine it, it's complicated and we can't change state law, of course. Specifically with the Citizens Advisory Committee, we can look towards state law for a little bit of guidance. It requires the CAC has adequate representation of minority groups, of the elderly and the disabled. And so, federal requirements require us to collect demographic data on our boards as well. And so I think as we talk about representation, it's important to ask who is being represented and who isn't, and who determines who is being represented. So I know the CAC, for example, has many appointments from local elected officials. And it kind of begs the question of who is being represented and who is not. And so perhaps there are methods to ensure that community members that are traditionally unheard can have a seat at the table here. For example, in Broward County, they have representatives from the NAACP on the board and other underserved communities. So really asking the board to, reflect on, who isn't at the table and how they can increase representation. Dana, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of summarize the essence of the recommendation is really to identify seats that more accurately reflect a citizen's voice and reflect the citizenry of the county, because that is the purpose of the CAC. As opposed to like the technical advisory committee would be an appropriate place for more technical expertise advisory members. So, just real quick. So Josh mentioned the Broward CAC. Josh, do you remember the number? It's something like 40 something. They have like 40 something members on their CAC.
Yeah.
So that would be something like that would be an option.
Chair, I have a follow-up to that, if I might.
Go ahead.
Thanks. What in your discussions did it ever come up that might be a good idea to add a citizen seat to the TPO big board?
Not allowed by state law, unfortunately.
Even a non-voting seat?
I'll look into that. I'm not sure. Definitely not a voting seat though is allowed. But it did come up. It definitely did come up, and it was something that was an original recommendation to add, but state law says that only representatives of modal agencies and elected officials can be of the local jurisdictions can be voting members of the TPO board.
I feel like this was specifically, it was brought up to have a non-voting seat, and it was determined that the that kind of function is already served by the CAC, and the fact that you guys have that, serve that function as representing the citizen's voice to pass on advice, because a non-voting seat would be more of again an advisory seat. But if you have any more thoughts on what that would look like or what the benefits of a non-voting seat would look like, I know I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Other questions from committee members online? Dana, I would follow up by saying I would welcome recommendations from you and Josh as to how the CAC might be expanded and improved. If you have specific recommendations, please pass those along for us to take a look at. And also, I really like the idea of an annual update. There's a saying in business, what gets measured gets done. And I think if we can see how we're doing on an annual basis in this area, it would be helpful for the CAC, and I suspect helpful for people as well. Those are my 2 comments. Anything else from members in the room? Any thoughts? This is an action item. We're being asked to recommend support to the TPO board. I'll entertain a motion. First, Chuck.
I'd like to make the motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve the report of the TPO. Is there a second? Any discussion on the motion? Anyone here in the room? Anyone online of committee members for further discussion? I think we can do this by a voice vote. Since so I'll say all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed to the motion, please say no.
Aye.
The late aye. Any no? Hearing none, the motion is adopted. Dana and Josh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm reminded by Mr. Shaw, I skipped over the approval of the minutes of previous meetings. So with committee's indulgence, we'll go back to that. We have the minutes of the June 2nd meeting, the July 14th meeting. These were included in your meeting packet. Any questions or comments or suggestions on the minutes from either of those two meetings? If there is none, I will put a motion to approve them both. I see no questions in the room. Can't tell if there are any questions virtually. Is there a motion to approve both sets of minutes at one time? Seeing there's no discussion.
I will.
Amy Espinoza moves approval of both sets of minutes. Is there a second? Second. Thank you very much.
Alexis.
Alexis, thank you. Are there any discussion?
I don't think that was Alexis. It came from that direction.
Oh, okay. Discussion from committee members online. Hearing someone trying to speak, but I can't understand.
If somebody has their microphone unmuted and they're not speaking, it would be a good idea to mute yourself. We're going to have a little bit of crosstalk.
Okay. Again, I think we can do this by a voice vote. All in favor of the motion to approve both sets of minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say no. Hearing no opposition, the minutes of both meetings are approved. Thank you very much. Now, we made that course correction to the status reports. And then the first item on the status reports is the study kickoff. DOT.
Yes, I think Craig Fox is going to lead this presentation. If Michael, if you could make him the presenter.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, we can see you.
All right, great. Just 1 second and all right. Wait, I think that's the wrong screen.
Okay.
Craig, you're recognized. Go ahead.
Okay, just 1 second. Can you see the go-to meeting or can you see the presentation?
Presentation. We see a presentation for the Heights Mobility Study. Were you going to talk about the Gandy PD&E?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know why it's, oh, you know what? I think okay, just give me 1 second. I think it's sharing the wrong screen. Yeah, we're talking about Gandy. Let's see. Sharing.
Maybe able to open it from my end.
Okay, here we go. Okay. How about now?
Perfect.
There we go.
All right. Great. So good morning, everybody. Thank you. My name is Craig Fox. I'm a PD&E project manager for the Florida Department of Transportation's District 7. Sorry, my voice is a little off, just the last stages of recovering from a cold, which is why I'm at home today too. But thank you for your time. So I'm here to discuss the PD&E study for Gandy Boulevard. The limits of this project are from 4th Street to West Shore Boulevard. So we'll just get right to it. Like I mentioned before, the limits start in Pinellas County at 4th Street, and they extend northeast along Gandy Boulevard across Old Tampa Bay, ending at West Shore Boulevard in Hillsborough County. The purpose of this PD&E study is to reduce traffic congestion, and improve bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. Improvements that are being evaluated include roadway widening and reconstruction, reconstructing one of the bridges over Old Tampa Bay, grade separation portions on the Pinellas side, and also including a shared use bike path crossing Old Tampa Bay and safe routes for crossing Gandy Boulevard throughout the project corridor. The project is divided into the 3 major segments. The first segment is Pinellas County, which is shown in red at the top of the screen. It extends from 4th Street north to the left of the screen here. It goes east along Gandy Boulevard to the Gandy Bridge Causeway. Well, to the Gandy Bridge on the west side. The second segment are the Gandy bridges, those 2 pair of bridges that's around a little over 2.5 miles in length. And the third segment is the Hillsborough County portion, which is from the east end of the Gandy Bridge to West Shore Boulevard. Now I'll review the existing conditions first, and that'll be followed up by going over the proposed conditions. So the existing conditions starting on the Pinellas side is a 4-lane divided roadway, urban principal arterial, and it's on the strategic intermodal system corridor. Existing posted speed limit is between 50 and 55 miles an hour, and truck traffic is a little over 5%. As you can see in this image to the right, there is a shared use path on the north side of Gandy Boulevard, and there are currently no bike lanes along Gandy Boulevard. There are strategic turn lanes, of course, throughout the project corridor also. Moving on to the Gandy bridges for existing conditions. There are 2 bridges, and there are 4 lanes with 2 lanes in each direction. The Eastbound Bridge, and that one is the bridge here to the bottom right corner of the screen. That was constructed in 1975. It was not constructed to enable widening, and it has around 30 years left in its remaining service life. The westbound Gandy Bridge was constructed later on in 1996. This bridge structure was constructed to enable widening. Therefore, if widening were to take place, you would have to reconstruct this bridge structure. The existing posted speed limit is 55 miles an hour. It is also on the 6 corridor, and they currently have currently all have standard shoulders with 10-foot shoulders on the outside lanes, and no bike facilities besides the shoulders are on this structure. On the Hillsborough portion, the existing is a 4-lane divided roadway. This also shows the settlement extension that was recently opened just a few months ago. The existing posted speed limit is 45 miles an hour. Truck traffic a little greater than 6%. There are 10-foot inside lanes with 11-foot outside lanes, and there's a sidewalk on the south side of the roadway, and in some sections there are trail portions along there too. There are no bike lanes right now along this portion also. So looking at overall safety of the corridor, from 2016 to 2020, there were 277 crashes that were intersection related, and 355 crashes that were rear end type of crashes. With a total crashes of 743 crashes, with unfortunately 9 fatalities. For bike and pedestrian safety, there were 7 pedestrian crashes with 2 fatalities and 10 bike crashes. So on the maps to the right, we have a heat map that shows the vehicular crashes, and we have call outs to where the bike and pedestrian crashes were. So you can see, so there are 3 ped crashes here at 4th Street, 1 bike crash there at Brighton Bay Boulevard, and they're also listed for the Pinellas segment on this image at the bottom also. As far as the vehicular crash contributing cases, it was caused due to heavy congestion and high turning movements, and improvements evaluated to reduce those crashes are to have a controlled access portion with great separation and uninterrupted flow. Now this slide, we cover at a high level the different alternatives. On the slides coming up next, we actually have some typical sections that more graphically show what the PD study is looking at. So the build alternative, starting again on the Pinellas side, is to have a 4-lane controlled access roadway, 2 lanes in each direction with frontage roads. Sorry. So this will give a controlled access typical section with frontage lanes to support. Bike and pedestrian accommodations would be accommodated on both the north and south sides of Gandy Boulevard. For the causeway portion, looking to widen that to 6 lanes to match with the Gandy Bridge proposed widening, and also have frontage roads for water maintenance and access to the beach areas. For the Gandy Bridge portion, with a turn lane being analyzed as a 6-lane controlled access roadway, so 3 lanes in each direction, which would widen the existing westbound Gandy Bridge from 4 lanes, 2 in each direction, to 6 lanes, 3 in each direction, and also repurpose the westbound Gandy Bridge for eastbound travel. Also looking to construct a new westbound Gandy Bridge on the north side of the existing bridges, and also include a multi-use trail linking both the Pinellas and Hillsborough counties. For segment 3 in Hillsborough County is 4-lane divided roadway. You may note that there's no change in the proposed roadway for Hillsborough County. So we're just looking to maintain existing conditions as is. Of course, as the lanes tie in to from the 6-lane portion on the Gandy Bridge to Hillsborough County, those will have to be kind of metered down, but we're just planning right now on just bleeding out those lanes pretty much right, well, at least the extra additional 3rd lane going eastbound right into the Gandy Expressway. So tying in with Athea Southern West Extension, we'll also look at modifying access management to surrounding properties and also operation improvements that'll also, make it safer for both motorists, bicycles, and pedestrians. So here are the typical sections that I mentioned before. So again, starting on the Pinellas side, so looking at a controlled access typical section. This typical section is from 4th Street to west of Brighton Bay Boulevard. On the next typical section, where I'm going to show the portion that's between these areas. But as you look at this typical section, so it has, first thing I want to note out is that we have a 12-use multi-use trail, both on the south side of the roadway and on the north side of the roadway. Right now, there's only one trail, just on the north side only. We're also going to have the 2-lane frontage roads, 2 lanes in each direction. And the controlled, the grade separated portion will have 4 lanes, 2 in each direction, 12-foot lanes that's grade separated. Now for the portion between Brighton Bay and San Martin Boulevard, we're looking to go a viaduct area for this region. By the way, this viaduct is just a general kind of image of it. This is not how it will look at the end of the process. So it's just a general one here. So again, we'll still have the multi-use trail both on the north and south side of the roadway. You still have the frontage road system to support local movements. Where it's going to be elevating these portions so we can reduce right-of-way impacts in strategic locations. Now for the Gandy Bridge portion, I'm going to start off the right side of the screen and go left to describe it. So this is the existing Eastbound Bridge. So this is the one that's built in the 1970s, which cannot be widened. So this bridge would be demolished, and then the existing westbound bridge will be repurposed, widened and repurposed to become the new eastbound bridge. So the existing bridge structure that's shown here in the grayer and the darker grayer colors, with the widening portion shown in the lighter gray and also the beige colors at the edges. So you have 12 lanes, 3 12-foot lanes, along with 10-foot shoulders. And then there'll be a newly constructed westbound bridge that's 3 12-foot lanes, 10-foot shoulders each side, with a trail on the newly constructed northern bridge that's connected in both Hillsborough and Pinellas counties. And for the Hillsborough section, like I mentioned before, so we're just going to maintain the existing typical section. So you're going to keep the same 4 lanes. There's no proposed widening or right-of-way impacts along this portion of the corridor. And although we do have just a 6-foot sidewalk here, there is a trail that's going to be included from Gandy Bridge to Bridge Street that's not shown in this typical section, because east of Bridge Street, it's just a lot more difficult to fit in the trail there. And it still kind of ties in with the local trail program. All right, so the project started off in April of 2020. As you will note, that was when the pandemic was pretty much in full swing. So that significantly delayed our traffic analysis, but we've since then been able to catch back up to speed. So right now we have the ongoing MPO presentations, and we're also going to be kicking off small group meetings with local community groups in the next upcoming months. We're able to have the public hearing in the spring or summer, the spring of 2022. And right now, the design portion of the Pinellas segment, that's the only portion that has funding right now. So looking at the overall project schedule, so this first box up here, first row up here, this is the Gandy P&E study that I've been discussing today. This, of course, includes segments 1, 2, and 3, the Pinellas, Hillsborough, and the Gandy Bridge segments. That one is fully funded, and we're ongoing in that right now. For the Pinellas portion, the only portion that's funded is the design portion. That's funded in fiscal year 2025. There's no funding for a right-of-way. There's no funding for construction. And for the Gainey Bridge and Hillsborough portions, there's no funding for design. No funding for design. There's no right-of-way required for the Gainey Bridge or the Hillsborough portion, and there's no funding for the construction of the Gainey Bridge or the Hillsborough portion also. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. This is my contact information, a phone number along with the email address. We also have a project website available that folks can look into. You can also sign up for a newsletter on that site to receive updates as we move forward with the project. Now I'd like to open up the floor to any questions.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Very interesting. See the two-county interconnection there. Before I open it to other questions, I would comment that this committee has consistently supported bike and pedestrian access. So I hope that you will include that into the design. Other questions of Craig Fox from the committee here in the room? Last shot.
Just have one. It's not actually on the work of the project. It's this project website. It's a good place to go get the information for the project. Is it somewhere that looks like an FDOT website possibly? Like, is that interconnected somewhere in our TPO site or any site for the county? I'm just thinking about centralized access to information, and now we're asking people to visit another website.
So I can answer. I think at least from a TPO perspective, all of these presentations are posted online. So, you know, somebody who may be interested in this can look at the same thing you just saw and access the website from the presentation. I don't think there's a one, you know, overarching universal website that covers all agencies at this stage.
All right.
Okay. Lloyd, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just a question in terms of timeframes on this, because they just, DOT recently redid that stretch from 275 through 4th Street, added the overpasses and the frontage roads. And I guess I'm just, my curiosity here is this project kind of seems like a logical extension of that one. So why the 10-year gap in actually trying to, I guess, procure funding and construct it? If you have an answer to that.
As far as the relation to the 275 projects, so when you look at the Pinellas side, there's definite traffic need for that. The Pinellas side, it is kind of failing in the existing condition. But when we look at the Gainey Bridges and also the Hillsborough side, those impacts are a little bit further off as far as the need for them actually reaching the kind of like the failing level of service condition. So I think there is probably more just of a transportation need on the northern section for 275, and that's just my assumption. I don't really have a kind of direct answer to that, but I can say certain that yeah, on the Pinellas side, there's definite need for it, and that's kind of why we have that one funded, that design funded in fiscal year 25. You know, if additional funds become available and we can advance it, that's something that we can certainly look at. But for right now, that's kind of where the need is, and that's kind of just where the funding is just laid out. For the other portions, the demand for traffic isn't quite as severe as the Pinellas side, so that's why we haven't really had a priority of funding those just as yet.
Yeah, I guess I should have been more clear that my comment was directed towards the Pinellas side, since that's the side that had the construction done a few years ago. My other question for you is on the stretch there by the, what one could call a beach, I guess, there near the bridge. If the area there is all dirt, people just typically drive on the dirt, park in the dirt, sometimes park in the water. Are there going to be paved parking lots at the beach now to go along with this project? Is there going to be street parking on the frontage road to the beach? Or is the plan just to have the frontage road and then turn offs where people just basically drive back down onto the dirt?
So before I answer that, I think Kirk signed on because you wanted to make a comment on the question that was brought up before, Kirk. or?
If the chair will allow, my name is Kirk Bogan with the Florida Department of Transportation.
Please go ahead.
Yes, the Pinellas side, as you may not recall, but this corridor has been studied for the last 20 years. And we were close to getting the P&E study approved in the 1990s and also in the early 2000s, but it was never approved. And so this is our third attempt at getting this corridor improved. Pinellas County saw the need to improve its section of this corridor, and so they wanted to fund that portion as soon as possible. But first, we have to get the PD&E study approved before they can start the design. And so they're looking to add funding for the latter phases once we get the PD&E study done.
Okay, thank you. Boyd?
I just was hoping to answer my question about the beach access and parking.
Yeah, sure. So for the beach area, so we are looking at a couple of different options for that, and we are looking to engage local communities, local entities also with their beach access area. One thing that we are committed is to at least providing access to it, along with making some sort of improvements around there. As far as what they will look like finally, we're still just in the works with that. So we're going to be reaching out to Pinellas County so we can be on the same page with the expectations for that area. But yes, we are currently aware of that area, kind of the deficiencies of the roadways around that beach area. And also, there are protected mangroves in it, that are heavily placed throughout that area too. So we are looking into it, and it will be part of our local agency coordination.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from committee members here in the room? Just a moment, Terrence. Any questions from committee members online? Eric Lamb? Eric, you're recognized. But we can't hear you. Eric, are you muted? We can't hear you in the room.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, for your recognition. One of my questions for you is, since this will be a raised roadway on the Pinellas side at least, how much traffic will you be taking away from these businesses? So they can't access several marinas, restaurants on the Pinellas side of Gandy. Any study on that? Any experiences, at least on the Hillsborough side on Gandy after the raised settlement? Have revenues on businesses went up, down since they can access the expressway? Just curious about that.
Yeah, so the Thea Expressway, that one was done by kind of separate agencies. So I have to just defer to Thea for any studies that they've done along that corridor. But for the Pinellas segment, there's quite a few differences between what we're proposing for the Pinellas segment and what is with the expressway. That one's more of an expressway tollway, which has kind of limited access. While this one, there are a couple more opportunities for accessing the local businesses along the corridor. We're working through the design, conceptual design right now within the PD&E study to get those access points kind of laid out. For the one that both serves the local entities, the local businesses and residents as much as possible, while still providing for the safety increases. So by no means are we going to have, is it going to be, you get on 4th Street and then it's a straight shot to the bridges. There's going to be opportunities to exit along that corridor, and those are the opportunities. There's going to be driver connections to the front row systems, and also opportunities for the front row system to access both the north and south sides of Gandy Boulevard.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions from committee members? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate this report. It's good. I'm sorry, Chair Trot had a question.
I just wanted to inquire and see if there was a priority preference for the Hillsborough portion of the Gandy Bridge. Should one be prioritized over the other?
Well, you'd really have to take them both at the same time, because when you construct the Gandy Bridge, and let me go back to that image. So when you construct this new bridge here, you're actually going to be coming in. So if you can see let me try to, oh no, I don't have a pointer on this PDF. So the Gandy Bridge is going to be, if you can follow my mouse at the bottom of the screen a little bit. So the Gandy Bridge would actually be reconstructed just on the north side. So that approach would be connecting in to Gandy Boulevard, a little north of where it is right now. So you have to tie in that road, the bridge, into the existing roadway. So you really have to have the Gandy Bridge and Hillsborough portion go at the same time. There's really no way to build them separately. and that's the approach that we're taking to funding them too, is that they have to go together.
All right, thank you.
All right, did you have another question?
Yeah, one comment in terms of the pedestrian and bicycle facility. I certainly hope the department would consider at least, while I know it would be a little bit more expensive, trying to separate it a little bit from the new bridge construction. Something more similar to what's been done on Courtney Campbell with that trail, because that trail, my concern is with putting pedestrians and bicyclists right next to, even with a barrier traffic going 75 miles an hour, which inevitably it will, that it may not see quite the amount of bicycle and pedestrian traffic that it would had there been a bit of separation. There's just a comfort thing, most bicyclists. So just ask the department to keep that in mind during the design phase.
Good point, thank you.
Yeah, and that is one of the options that we're looking at also.
And Craig, I would just add that as you're planning for this corridor, be sure to include any options for transit that could be incorporated into the design of the new Gandy Bridge. So thank you for the presentation. Get ideas there, keep us posted and give us a periodic update on the Gandy project.
Will do, thank you.
The next item on our agenda is in fact the Heights Mobility Study. Is Alex Henry going to give that presentation?
Actually, I think it's Craig again.
Craig, do it. Well, welcome back, Mr. Fox.
Yeah, I just need 1 second to just grab some water, some more water right out. But Justin Willits, along with Cal Hardy, is going to join me with this presentation. So just give me 1 second.
Okay. All right.
All right, thank you. And, oh, my screen's not shared. Let me fix that. All right, there we go.
Here we go.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody again. So if you just joined on, my name is Craig Fox, PD&E Project Manager for Florida Department of Transportation, District 7, and I'm here along with Justin Willits and Cal Hardy. Justin Willits with Hart, and Cal Hardy with the City of Tampa to discuss it, to give an update on the Heights Mobility study. So I'll get into it. All right, so just covering the project limits of the study. So it's in the City of Tampa, Hillsborough County, from Florida, on Florida Ave and Tampa Street. The southern limits are Tyler Street to the south, to the bottom of the image here. And it goes north along both Tampa and Florida to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. The goal of the study purpose is to provide safe and efficient mobility to complement the character of existing communities, to balance the local and regional travel needs, and provide mobility options for all modes and users. Now, when we look at the overall study, one thing that we wanted to focus on is the vital few. And this is, the vital few is, another push of statewide DOT to improve safety, enhance mobility, and inspire innovation within our projects. And so the top left image here, what you see, what this shows are the type of crashes that we have along these corridors, along Florida and Tampa. So you see around 42%, the highest percentage of crashes are the angle crashes that occur at the intersections. Pedestrian crashes accounted for around 20%. And then the third highest are rear end crashes. So as far as safety goes, we're looking to increase safety by having speed management, so you don't have those high speed conditions, by limiting pedestrian, one issue out there, right now is speed management. Another issue out there currently is limited pedestrian crossing opportunities and also sight line issues at unsignalized intersections. Issues with mobility include substandard walk and biking facilities with high level of existing transit demand, which is definitely a good thing to have. But there's also potential for future premium transit that's not really accommodating the corridor right now. So I'm going to pass it over to Hart to cover some of the ridership statistics. Justin? Yes. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Not working.
Oh yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so this is Justin Willits with Hart. As most of you probably know, this is the BRT and streetcar corridor. But I just wanted to go over some of the existing ridership statistics. We pulled some ridership data along the corridor from fall of 2019. And this is kind of to help tell the story of why, even with the existing service, we feel pretty strongly that this is a good corridor for repurposing one of the 3 existing travel lanes for transit. It's under capacity as well from a traffic perspective, and the 3rd lane doesn't add a bunch of value for traffic, but it would add a lot of value if it was exclusively used for transit. In this table at the top, you can see Route 1 operates 15-minute peak hour headways right now, 4 trips per hour, moving anywhere from 50 to almost 90 passengers per hour in the peak direction. Route 5 and 6 also operate on the corridor, less frequent headways, but still pretty frequent at 20 minutes for Route 6. And when you add all of those trips up in the peak hour, we move up, in some instances, up to 180 people, which is pretty good utilization of transit along the corridor. And again, helps kind of make the case for why this is such an attractive corridor for BRT and repurposing that existing lane. Next slide. So the coordination efforts throughout these projects have been pretty extensive, as you all are probably well aware of. The guideway for the streetcar is planned to accommodate rubber tire transit vehicles as well. We're incorporating some flexibility into that planning to make sure that if the one project goes first, it meshes well with the other project, and we're going to stay on the same side of the roadway as the streetcar if it extends all the way up as it's currently planned. And then on the right, you can see the full length of the BRT project from downtown Tampa up Florida Avenue to Linebaugh, which then cuts over to Nebraska, Fowler, and Bruceby Downs into the university area. Next slide. And just a refresher, we vetted 17 alternatives for the alignment for this project. The top 3 contenders from the early analysis were Palm, Waters, and Linebaugh for the crossover. Palm was eliminated due to the overlap with the BRT Light Metro Rapid on Nebraska Avenue. And then Waters and Linebaugh were very close in our scoring, but Linebaugh did just edge it out. And fortunately, many months later, after the alignment was kind of hashed out, we were able to incorporate some of the recommendations of the TOD study, and some of that analysis for the TOD study showed that this alignment was a little more favorable for the development as well. So it kind of hit all the marks for operations, ridership, and TOD potential. As many of us know, that northern part of Florida Avenue around the river and just north of Bush have a lot of long-term development potential. But yes, we did finally land on line ball, and that is my portion of the presentation, and I'll be happy to entertain questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. So moving on to just a recap of the public engagement efforts. So between 2017 and 2019, there were 3 public workshops that were held, along with this is in relation to the Heights Mobility Study. So the 3 public workshops held, along with neighborhood walk audits, presentations to neighborhood associations, local tabling events, and also online tools made available. In regards to the hard BRT study, there were 2 workshops, 2 public workshops, along with stakeholder advisory groups and meetings, and technical advisory group meetings. Now, when we look at the 5 most desired outcomes that came from the public, overwhelmingly number one was wider sidewalks, followed by more bike lanes and routes, more pedestrian crossings, more premium transit, and also more traffic calming. So here are some short-term improvements that are programmed within the Department of Work program. So starting with Florida Avenue, and these are all set for fiscal year 22, which for the department, our fiscal year starts in July. So July of 2021, that starts the fiscal year 22. So these will go to construction. These probably start off anytime between July now and June of next year. So there's Wilder Ave, the signal on Wilder Avenue, pedestrian improvements at Gideon's, and the signal at Idlewild and Knollwood Street. For Tampa Street, proposing a signal at 7th Ave and Chelsea Ave. And then for Nebraska Avenue, these are a little further out in the timeline. So these are all in fiscal year 2024. Scheduled for Idlewild, Seaward, Janelle, and East Byron Street and 11th Ave. And all those projects either involved producing these RRFBs, or rapid rectangular flashing beacon crossings, that are popularized over the last couple of years, or also would be just a standard full signal to provide safe crossings. In addition to those intersection improvements, we also have bicycle boulevards that are proposed along Ola Avenue and along Central Avenue. And what these will do is provide low stress alternatives to the busier Florida and Tampa streets. It will also provide new and improved crossings along with wayfinding and traffic calming. And these are scheduled, Ola Ave, that design was scheduled in fiscal year 21, so that's already under design, and construction is scheduled for fiscal year 23. The Central Avenue, that design is kicking off shortly in fiscal year 22, with construction beginning in fiscal year 24. And the image to the right just shows kind of where these roadways are located in relation to the Florida and Tampa corridors. And that's where it's located in relation to Highland Avenue over there too. So Ola Ave is on the west side, and Central Ave is more of an eastern route. So now I want to cover some of the past alternatives that were reviewed and that just didn't really make it on to the next step. The first one of these was a non-motorized alternative, which included wider sidewalks and a protected bike facility on Tampa Street. So as you can see in this image, it provided a 2-way cycle track or just wider sidewalks. And this would mean that, so you'd have a lane reduction, reducing Florida and Tampa just down to 2 lanes in each direction. But unfortunately, this would not be compatible with premium transit since it wouldn't give the bus a more advanced lane to be in. So the bus would just basically be stuck in the general purpose lane and would not get an advantage. The second alternative that was dropped was a 2-way alternative. And this alternative, Florida and Tampa, would be converted to 2-way streets. So it would still be 3 lanes, but the center lane would become a 2-way left turn lane. This also wasn't compatible with premium transit because the bus would again then be stuck just in northbound or southbound lanes and wouldn't have an advantage of having an exclusive or a priority lane. This also resulted in the most significant impacts to automobile level of service and existing transit travel time. So not only would you slow down the traffic the most in this alternative, you'd also slow down the transit the most in this alternative too. So the preferred long-term alternative is shown on the screen. So on Tampa Street, you're looking at a 12-foot. So we're looking at, let me just start with the points at the bottom. So looking at for the general purpose lane, it's an exclusive transit lane, which is shown here by the red colored lane on both Tampa Street and Florida Avenue. The bus will be running on the eastmost lane, whether it's Tampa or Florida, and it's pretty consistent rule, which where the streetcar would run. The streetcar, of course, would make the U-turn at Palm Avenue. So to be able to share that streetcar, the bus will be able to share that lane. It would also provide a wide sidewalk on Florida Avenue and a shared use path on Tampa Street. So you'd have a 10-foot sidewalk from 26th Street to MLK, but in other portions, just because right of way is more constrained, you'll only be able to widen to a 7.5-foot sidewalk. It would also provide additional pedestrian crossings and intersection safety improvements throughout the project corridor. Now, in relation to bikes and pedestrians, the benefits are going to be the wider sidewalks on Florida Ave and the shared use path on Tampa Street. Also looking to do additional pedestrian crossings, improve safety at intersections, signalized intersections, and by having that greater separation between automobile traffic and the bikes and pedestrians, that also increases safety. Also, going down to 2 lanes does lower the speeds, which supports bike and pedestrian safety, and it will increase access to transit. In relation to traffic calming benefits, the lane repurposing will help slow down traffic, and we're also looking to have a raised concrete separator in strategic locations to provide vertical deflection. So one thing you notice in traffic design is that you can change the posted speed limit, but unless you actually provide some kind of physical characteristics to the roadway, whether that be increased landscaping or increase things like, say, the vertical deflection by those separated barriers, people don't really slow down much because they don't feel like the roadway, really, they need to slow down. So providing for this additional lane along with strategic location for the concrete separators will help to slow down the traffic along the corridor. And also having more signals and pedestrian crossings would also put the mindset of the drivers in more of a pedestrian focused area. Benefits to transit, and this kind of ties back to the alternatives that were dropped before. This one actually does provide for an exclusive transit lane, unlike those other 2 alternatives, which were the 2-way and the non-motorized options. So this provides exclusive lane to transit and improves the grading of the overall area for future transit grants. So the more transit you get, the more likely you are to get future grants in the future. So that's a big plus to heart. Also provides space for enhanced stops. So since you're gonna have the wider sidewalks and also the shared use pass area, there's also that also leaves more space for having enhanced bus stops. New pedestrian crosswalks will also increase access to transit, and it's consistent with the future HART, BRT, and streetcar extension projects. So now we're going to take a look at the traffic. So I know we mentioned a lot about reducing these lanes. So one thing that always comes up is, okay, what's this going to do to the traffic congestion? So what I've shown on the screen right now is the no-build intersection level of service in the design year. The design year is 2045. As you can see, the no-build condition, you have a couple intersections, say Scott Palm and South Palm, Columbus, and MLK, which are either failing at a level of service F level or worse. So that's if there's no build, so you leave it just the way it is, those intersections are gonna fail in 2045, and that's only in the Florida Avenue. For southbound with Tampa Street, it's a little bit better. With the only level service getting close to failing would be Scott Street at level service D. in 2045. Now, next off, we're going to show the build intersection and for the level service design year. So design year again is 2045. So this is with the lane reduction. So you can see the same intersections are still failing with Scott, Palm, Columbus, and MLK, and Florida Avenue. And then for southbound on Tampa Street, so yes, there is a reduction in level of service. So some of these, which were level of service C before, they do reduce down to level of service D, but there's no reduction down to level of service E or F, which is a good sign. So even though you're taking away a lane, you still have a relatively decent flow of traffic in the design year. One thing that we're also looking to do with this project is to improve the drainage conditions along the corridor. There is consistent flooding that occurs in some areas. There are no inlets just because the roadway is just so old. So it's going to involve pretty extensive drainage improvements, installing trunk lines along the roadways, installing inlets in some locations where there are none today. So we're looking at ways to adjust that drainage with the roadway reconstruction project that the department's proposing. It's going to reduce flooding and also keep pedestrians dry, because if you can imagine being a pedestrian walking on the sidewalk here, not only do you have to worry about the driveways, down the older driveways with the older design dipping down, become flooded. If a vehicle is going in this lane next to you, they can certainly wet a pedestrian. So there should be significant improvements. We're able to move forward with the drainage project. As far as funding goes, right now, construction is partially funded in fiscal year 2025 and 2026. However, that does not include the drainage improvements that I mentioned in the previous slide. So in order to get to those drainage improvements, we submitted for the U.S. Department of Transportation RISE grant for fiscal year 23. So if we do get this grant, we'll be able to significantly advance the construction to fiscal year 2023, and we'll be able to include those drainage improvements that I mentioned before. So you're looking at a whole roadway reconstruction project that's going to result in a much more improved drainage and much more improved bicycle and pedestrian transit capabilities along these two corridors. At this point, I'm going to pass it over to Cal to discuss items related to the city of Tampa.
Hello, thank y'all. So we have a pilot project that we started developing as part of this as well.
Could you identify yourself for the record, please?
Sure. I'm glad y'all can hear me too. I should ask that too. My name's Cal Hardy. I'm the City of Tampa's Transportation Capital Projects Manager, and we do some in-house design as well, and that's part of this project.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So the city was developing a pilot project to try to advance some bus rapid transit through the urban core. Our project limits were Tampa Street from Twig Street to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and Florida Avenue from Kennedy Boulevard to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard as well. We developed this in-house, and our scope included repurposing our general use travel lanes into dedicated bus lanes. With this project, this was a pilot, so we were not proposing any kind of resurfacing. Rather, we were looking to use emphasize the bus lane with red colored transit, basically red paint, and to physically separate them from travel lanes, vehicular travel lanes, by delineator posts. Next slide. So as part of the project pilot, I just kind of took a couple of snippets from one on Tampa Street, one on Florida Avenue, just to kind of give a general overview of what we're looking at. Basically, what you see there in red is the bus only lane. In this area, our BRT pilot concept utilized right side running, meaning we're trying to accommodate the existing buses that they have now, and we were looking to basically try to take out a lane and utilize that as a transit only space, but utilizing the existing technology. For this area, our bus lane does end right north of I-275. to facilitate those southbound rights onto I-275 on-ramp at K Street. However, it does pick up south of I-275. So we kind of have, because it's a pilot, we kind of try to accommodate the existing lane uses. And since it is a right side running, we kind of have to stay on that side of the road. But generally, you can kind of see how this is a dedicated bus lane with a separated bike lane in this area. We do have some areas where we are running bus and bike in the same lane, and the red color pavements there, and you can see some delineator posts, which is these little yellow dots that are really kind of hard to see, but those are there as well. Next slide. On Florida Avenue, it's basically the same thing, right side running. I highlighted this little 2-block segment because in this area, we are taking away parking on the current east side of the roadway. East is down, west is up. But for this area, I just wanted to show that we were looking at putting parking on the west side using there's a few auxiliary lanes that don't have a lot of use, don't have a lot of traffic, but those auxiliary lanes are left turn lanes onto Twiggs and Zach. So with this, you can see another area that's a little bit different than Tampa Street is that this is a shared bus and bike lane. You can kind of see the little arrow down there. And then where it looks like a candy cane, that is where it's a bus lane, but they also allow for right turns, so people would look over and merge into the bus lane to make that right turn. Next slide. So the City of Tampa is, City of Tampa, FDOT, and HART are setting up a public workshop. The public workshop will be at the Tampa River Center at Julian B. Lane Park at 402 West Laurel Street, Tampa, Florida 33607, and is scheduled for Tuesday, September 21st from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. And then I think that's back to you, Craig, for the next slide.
Thanks, Kat. Okay, so next up are the public workshop that Kyle mentioned, September. The FDOT lane repurposing process is going to continue through fall of 2021, and that one's the lane repurposing one. That was led by the City of Tampa, and they're submitting their request to the Florida Department of Transportation for that. So the federal raise grant announcement, we're looking to hear from the feds in the fall of winter 2021. Also, of course, fingers crossed that we get that. We think it's a pretty good candidate for receiving those grants, and we're pretty hopeful we're going to be successful in that grant. We're going to have continued coordination with the HART BRT study on the corridor north of MLK. That is ongoing. That's an overall regional BRT conversations. And here I have the content information. So that's myself, Craig Fox with the DOT, Cal Hardy, he presented for the City of Tampa, and Justin Willits, he presented on behalf of HART. And you may also reach out to Atlanta Brazier, also with the City of Tampa. Now I'd like to open up the floor for any questions, and thank you for your time, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. We have some questions here. Charlotte.
Yes, I am a resident of Seminole Heights area. I'm so glad to see this. I have familiarity with both sides, Nebraska and Florida. I would like to understand why the Nebraska Publix crossing is not a higher priority than the one on Florida, because it is extremely dangerous. As a matter of fact, I almost hit somebody yesterday because they were crossing mid-block. So I would like to understand the prioritization of the two crosswalks that are proposed on Florida at Idlewild and Nebraska at Idlewild.
Yeah, I don't have that information available to me right now, but I can certainly reach out to our traffic operations division and get a response to you.
Yeah, I think as far as life-saving, Nebraska is, I'm an eyewitness daily.
Craig, this is Demian Miller, Attendant Oliver. I know that all of the Nebraska crosswalks have been bundled into one major design project that runs from Kennedy all the way up to south of Bush Boulevard. And part of the reason for that, specifically at the Publix location, is that the concept that the department developed, and it's not an absolute, certainty that it will be what it's built, but the concept on the table is to actually do a little bit of widening there and also provide left turn access into the Publix, because that's another safety issue at that location. And so it's a little bit more involved to construct that crosswalk as planned than some of the other ones where we just pop in the crosswalk. And so all of those are bundled into one project, and that may be why they're a little bit later in the development cycle than the little ones on Florida that are being done through the push button contracts.
That helps, thank you.
Okay, other questions in the room, Mike Prindle?
Yes, I had a question about in terms of access to the transit lanes. Is it planned for taxis and Ubers to be able to utilize the transit lane as well as buses?
No. The way that business access transit lanes typically work is that only the bus is allowed to make through. Okay, and I'm specifically talking about a business access transit lane or a BAT lane. So if it is a BAT lane, only buses are allowed to make those through movements, and at certain strategic locations, vehicles are allowed to make a right turn lane. So like, let me go back to the slide. Okay, and so in the areas here, all vehicles will be able to like merge to the lane to make a right turn, but in this lane, it's only going to be allowed buses, bikes, in this case. And let me try to zoom in a little bit. There we go.
But not private vehicles for hire or anything like that.
Emergency vehicles would be able to use them for through movements as well.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Emergency vehicles definitely.
So I would certainly recommend, in other cities that utilize these, sometimes called red carpet lanes, like San Francisco, they typically give access to taxis and Ubers. And I think especially within the downtown area where, you're wanting to encourage people not to drive downtown, that might be a consideration to give them access, especially because our bus frequency isn't such right now that you're having a bus run down this stretch every 2 minutes or 3 minutes, where I think allowing access to taxis or Ubers would, clog or severely, lower the efficiency of the lane for the bus, essentially. My other question had to do with the proposal for the switching it to 2 lanes in the center turn lane on Tampa Street. I understand the project from Twigs to MLK, but was that proposed 2 laning for that entire stretch, or just a stretch north of 225? I just wanted some clarity on that point.
Yeah, this is proposed. Damien, I believe went to Highland, right?
What's that, Craig? I'm sorry.
As far as the two-way conversion, that was all the way up to the apex. So to merge.
Yeah, we had looked at that conceptually, and actually that got looked at under an MPO study about 5 years ago as well, all the way up to the current 4-lane undivided section at Violet Street, and for all the reasons you stated, it was really interesting because we talked to people, and we tend not to ask folks what specific design interventions do you want to see, because that's engineering. We ask people, what are your priorities for the corridor? What does it need? And everybody said, it needs better sidewalks, it needs lower speeds, transit, things like that. And the 2-lane alternative, besides not providing space for a transit guideway, which is an important priority for not just the city but the county as well, it didn't really create those opportunities for wider sidewalks or like the shared use path that we're trying to put in on Campus Street. And so that's why we stuck with the one-way pairs. But the study process did go all the way up, from downtown up to Violet Street.
All right, so just so I'm clear, my question was, which section of Tampa is that proposed for? That's just all my question is. Violet?
Yeah, for Tampa Street, it would be from, the current project on the table is from Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, south down to Tyler Street. And then for the BRT pilot, it would, so the DOT project is to Tyler Street, and the city's BRT pilot extends a little bit further south. I think Cal said the Twigs, where the bus currently turns around.
Okay, so two laning potentially on that entire stretch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think once it gets into the downtown, it picks up an extra lane. So I think south of Tyler, it's 4 lanes now. Cal, correct me if I'm, man, I work right there. No.
If you can go to slide 23, the majority of the once you get south of I can't remember where the cutoff is. It might be Tyler, but the majority of the area that we're looking at is there's some area here, for instance, on Florida Street where we're not really taking out a lane. It's only auxiliary lane anyway, but the travel lanes still remain. So there's still 3 lanes going up north and south there. We're just kind of in this area, we're taking out parking and then replacing the parking on the other side in what is now an auxiliary lane. So that's the only difference there. But for the most part, we were taking out a lane on Tampa Street south of the interstate, but there's still 3 lanes there. So it would be the 4th lane that we would be taking out in that location.
And then I was just going to respond to some of the earlier stuff about, Uber, Lyft, taxi. That's definitely something that we do not want in our lanes. That's something that's a safety hazard for us in our existing conditions downtown. So I think working with the mobility department, designated areas for ride shares is definitely, curb space for that is appropriate, especially in downtown. But it would negatively impact our running times and our schedule because we would get stuck behind that if we allowed it in the bus lanes. So finding better areas probably off the main line on the side streets would be more appropriate. And then just a point of clarification, our existing service on many sections of the pilot project is a bus every 5 to 10 minutes. Most times of the day, we have a lot of overlapping service in the downtown area. So we can justify this type of investment with our existing service along the corridor. Thanks.
Yeah, and one more thing on the Uber Lyft. I believe, I know San Francisco, they do allow taxis, but I don't believe they allow by law Uber and Lyft in there. So I just did a quick Google search, and according to their transit agency, Uber and Lyft are not allowed in the RIT transit. So I think, I don't know if they made the decision based on different licensing for taxi drivers or whatnot, but that's what they said on the San Francisco transit agency website.
Okay, but still no consideration for taxis, right?
Yeah, but to your point, FHWA does not restrict either. So I don't think there's anything that would necessarily restrict us from allowing Uber and Lyft in there. It would just have to be something that we would have to go through, like actually look into a little bit more. So, and also, I don't know if there's any state laws pertaining to that as far as RIT transit paint and state laws.
We have a question in the room. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. On this slide, I see the shared bus and bike lane kind of transitions to the right turn lane for vehicles. I'm concerned about conflict between bikes that are in that lane and cars that are going to turn right, because I know that is a particularly dangerous maneuver for bikes. The right turn when cars aren't paying attention. So is there kind of a justification in terms of lower speed, or is it a matter of like right of way where the bikes can't have a separate space there? Can you clear that up for me?
In this area, it's a matter of right of way or of actual physical space. So the bus lane is a certain width, which would also kind of eat into any kind of bike lane that's there. So that's basically the reasoning for them to be shared. As far as the turning movements, yeah, that is a concern on this one. It's hard to see, but we are proposing kind of some delineators. So it would, in this idea, basically a cyclist would be riding kind of closer to the safer maneuver, would be kind of riding closer to the inside lane for that space, but they do have some physical separation and delineators. But yeah, that it is a conflict area. And the red paint, we try to highlight our conflict areas as much as we can. The red paint would act to do that, even though it's not green conflict, it is a conflict area, so drivers should be more aware that they're entering into a shared space.
And this is in
Yeah, I
like,
would just,
sorry, I was gonna say, this is a more dense area of the project, right? So I guess it is kind of context sensitive.
Yep.
Around like a larger, like, arterial or something.
yeah, I would say that movement you're describing is also an existing concern with the existing bike lane. So the delineators should hopefully make this a safer bike facility, despite it being mixed with a bus and bike. So hopefully it would be a small improvement to the existing right hooks that you have to deal with in the bike lane on street, as somebody who's used it and been in that not so great situation.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. This is a great report. Lots of good detail in there, and committee members have your direct contact information. So thanks for bringing this to our attention. And if the committee members have additional questions or specific issues, I'm sure they can feel free to reach out to each of you guys as appropriate. Thanks a lot.
Can I clarify one thing? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I misspoke earlier. There is only 3 lanes on Tampa in that stretch for right now. I thought there was a 4th lane there, but the stretch north of the interstate. So that's 2-lane section would continue. But if, as Craig said, with the level of service there, the intersection still operate I think in that area at a C, even in future 2045 conditions.
Okay,
so.
Thanks for that. All right, I'd like to move to our next item, C on status reports.
Bill?
Yeah.
We have a comment from from Gail, who's trying to record this meeting. She's just asking to make sure to identify yourself for the recording. I'm not sure if she's talking about presenters or people in the room, but it would help, I think, if you would, or just to say who's speaking.
Good point. Okay. So next item is our eminent domain and relocation process. Murphy, Mr. Eden, DOT. You guys queued up and ready to go?
We are. I'm trying to. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great.
Michael, could you make Joe Murphy the presenter, please?
Super. Let's see how that does.
Here we go.
You got it up?
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting us today. I'm Joseph Murphy. I'm the District Acquisition Administrator for Florida Department of Transportation in District 7. Joining me today is Josh Eaton. He's Senior Relocation Specialist. He's a consultant embedded in Florida in our office. And we're invited here today to give you guys kind of an overview of the right-of-way process as it relates to the residential acquisitions on the downtown intersection. I'm trying to figure out how to, okay, here we go. So we buy real estate based on the Constitution. It's allowed for in the Constitution, and before our Constitution allowed for it, the government would typically take property as needed with no compensation. The authority by which we work is provided for the 5th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, Title 23, 42 and 49. This gives us not only the right to acquire property for the public good, but also outlines the payment and other things we have to do in the due process by which we use to take it. The main document we use to buy right-of-way is the Uniform Relocation and Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act of 1970. Most of this act goes towards relocation, but Title III of the URAR establishes the policies by which we acquire right-of-way for federal aid projects. Kind of as an aside, when we're buying right-of-way, this is not an impersonal, standoffish process. We're in the trenches with the property owners. We have personal contact with each property owner and every tenant. We explain their rights. We explain the process. We have an appraisal done. We have a written offer of just compensation. And they have an opportunity, they have time to consider the offer before any court action is ever even discussed. We're required to pay the property owner before they surrender possession. And we also, in Florida, is allowed for by the federal process, we pay their fee if they want to get an attorney, and we pay their attorney's fees if they want to have an attorney to represent them in negotiations with us. In your last meeting, I was sitting in there, and there was a lot of discussion about how we got from a Zillow value of the property to the budget we actually have for this project. And Zillow just has absolutely nothing to do with the process. When we're out doing our right-of-way cost estimates, which are typically done several times well in advance of the project, we look at the value of the land, we consider sales, we consider listings of similar properties. Every parcel is individually considered as to its value. But then we have to look at what are the administrative costs, what is our time costs. We've got labor costs, we've got litigation costs, we have our attorneys involved, we have their attorneys involved. We have mediation costs. We pay for their expert witness fees. We have our expert witness fees. We have their appraisals and our appraisals. And then on top of the acquisition costs, we've got the relocation costs, which include replacement housing and move costs. So somebody was trying to draw a correlation between the Zillow value and our budget, and you can see it just, there's so many variations there. There's nothing nothing to draw. So our process begins, the right-of-way process at DOT begins when we get right-of-way maps transferred from our mapping people. We send the notice to owner out, we start the appraisal process. Once we get the appraisal in, we make an offer, we get into negotiations and relocation. Once the title's transferred, then property management kicks in and clears whatever obstacles there are to get out of the way of the road project. This is kind of the acquisition process at a glance. We start at the top, we give them a notification that, hey, we're getting ready to have a project coming your way. Between these two steps, we meet with the property owners, we have the appraiser go out, the appraiser meets with the property owner, many times the attorney's out there at that. Then we give them an offer. This minimum 30 days of negotiation, that's statutory minimum 30 days. Typically, we're in negotiations for 3 to 6 months before we ever get close to filing for condemnation. But after negotiation, if we agree on price, we go to a closing. If we don't, we file the case for condemnation. We don't quit negotiating at that point. We're still negotiating with the property owner and their attorney after it goes to condemnation. There's an order of taking at some point where we're actually given title to the property, but the actual value of the property, the total value, isn't determined at that point. We continue negotiations then. If it has to go through a jury, at some point, either we agree on a price or a jury determines a price, and then the judge determines gives us a final judgment as to value we have to pay. All the way through here, we're negotiating. We're trying to get out of the legal process, and we're trying to work with the people to come to some sort of mutually agreeable settlement on the property. Again, this is just kind of an overview of our appraisal process. You can see where we have appraisal and appraisal review. Typically, we have fee appraisers that appraise the property. We review the appraisal to make sure it meets our standards. We start negotiations, and relocation go together. I don't know, we left that out of the slide, but you see negotiation continues through the end of condemnation. Then we have legal gets involved, property management, and typically this phase runs 18 to 24 months. On the, excuse me, I'm sorry. Here we go. This is the timeline on the downtown interchange. We actually started data collection for the appraisals in May. We got approval, the project was funded. We finally got approval to send the notice to owners on June 30th. There's no contact prior to this approval. So we sent the notice to owners out on June 30th. We started appraisals. We're in the process right now of getting the appraisals done. They're due into us around the middle of August. They'll go through and that's not all of them on one date. They start coming in then. The appraisal review process will be August 15th to the middle of October. During this time, we make the owners, we give the offers to the owners and their relocation eligibility pretty much at the same time. Tenants, I think, are a little bit delayed. Josh will cover that a little later, but offers to owners come in with their relocation package. So we currently have planned from October of this year until January of 23 for negotiations. We'll send them anything we haven't settled yet, we'll send to suit in June of 22. Now, that's not because we're mad at them, that's because we've got to have enough time for it to flow through the court system before our certification in January of 2023. So this is just an overview of this. Josh is going to go through the relocation process a little bit with you. That's kind of the relocation process is fascinating to me. It's really cool to see what the government's outlined for anybody that we do displace. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh. And if you would, Josh, reintroduce yourself for everybody.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm really honored to be in front of you today and presenting on relocation and really the relocation process. But my name is Josh Eaton, and I'm actually a consultant. I work for Independence Acquisition and Appraisal, but I am embedded, we call it, here at the DOT. I've been here for 7 years at District 7 in Tampa. I did work for the state previously. I actually was the state relocation administrator for a short time in Tallahassee. So I've had a chance to see the relocation process from many different angles. This is my favorite angle, actively working with people. We can go to the next slide, Joe, please. So Joe did touch on the Uniform Act. We abbreviate it and call it the Uniform Act. I mean, this was significant legislation because prior to 1970, when this was implemented, this is a federal law, you know, a displacing agency would just need to buy a property and then there was no relocation benefits. You just had to go. And this outlined a set of policy and procedures that we must follow anytime federal funds are authorized and used in any phase of construction or a project at all. We have to follow this. So, it guarantees fair and consistent treatment. It gives people an understanding of what to expect in the process. And the real end goal is that people who are being displaced from a roadway project, that they do not suffer disproportionate injuries as a result of the project. Now we can go to the next slide. So as I stated earlier, when does the Uniform Act apply? Anytime federal dollars are utilized in any phase of a project. Like I said, we must follow it. Basically, everything I'm going to discuss from here on out is simply policy. It's simply Uniform Act, what we must do. It's also been incorporated into Florida statute, into our own right-of-way manual. And really, it's federal law that we must follow. We can go to the next slide. So what are the 4 components of relocation assistance? We're going to be touching on the planning aspect, different notices that people are going to receive, advisory services, which is actually a very big part of relocation, especially on a residential situation, and then the actual relocation payments. Next slide. One thing I do want to reiterate is what I'm going to be talking about today, because I know we've been asked to discuss on this specific project. There is an entire relocation process for businesses as well, and a whole different set of benefits that I'm not going to touch on today because we don't really have business displacements here. We're just dealing with pretty much residential impacts. So that is what I'm keeping this to today. So relocation planning, I mean, it outlines a few things here. These are done at different points in time, but early on in the process, like during a PD&E phase, we're evaluating each alternative. Let's say we got a new project corridor with different alignments. We're looking at each one of those alignments. How many potential relocations are we going to have? We're actually going to prepare a conceptual stage relocation plan. We're going to look at, what are the income levels on each corridor alternative? What are, race factors, disability factors? For businesses, are we going to wipe out the only grocery store in town in a small town? These are things we need to consider when we're going through the relocation planning during the conceptual stage. We're not talking to people directly during that time. We're doing the research. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to go into what we do planning-wise once we're ready to make an offer in a minute. But this slide right here is just specific to notices, and it talks about some of the notices that we're going to give to people at the time of offer. To a property owner who we're displacing, we're going to be giving a brochure. We actually give that well in advance. We want to answer any questions they have well in advance. Statement of relocation eligibility, that's going to tell them how much money they're going to have to go towards a replacement house above and beyond what we're buying the property for. A 90-day letter of assurance is an assurance letter that we're giving that we cannot require them to relocate for at least 90 days of the offer. And of course, the 30-day notice, we don't give that until we own the property. We can't give that until we own the property, but eventually people are told, what kind of date they have that they need to relocate. But we do work very closely with people so that's not a surprise. Next slide, please. So relocation advisory services, I would say this is the crux of what we do. I mean, when we get right-of-way requirements and we have maps, we know what we're going to acquire, we're ready to start the appraisal process, we're starting the appraisal process, we're going out and we're doing a personal interview with every household that's going to be impacted. I want to get to know them. I want to build a rapport. I care about these people. But I want to understand their housing makeup. Who lives in this house? What are their ages? What kind of disabilities are there? What's their current housing situation? What is it they're looking to do? Where do they want to go? Are there any special needs that impact housing? I mean, I've seen people who they've taken all the carpeting out of their home because of a significant allergy situation. So we don't want to move somebody into a house that's not going to address that. So we're going to address all of that. I would say that we act almost like double agents. I do as a consultant work on behalf of state DOT and report on behalf of state DOT, but I feel like I'm an advocate on their behalf. And so the people who I work for, they're not necessarily out there seeing everything that's going on in a household, but I am. And so I want to, if there's a time when it comes down to a gray area, a decision needs to be made, I'm advocating on their behalf. It talks about on the bottom thing here, decent, safe, and sanitary housing. That's really important because any replacement housing that's going to receive our funding is going to need to be decent, safe, and sanitary housing. But that actually does work out to their benefit as well. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I guess the nuts and bolts of everything is it does come down to relocation payments. We want to be able to pay. These are some of the things we're going to be talking about on the next few slides. By the way, all relocation payments are not considered income by the Internal Revenue Code, and that's very significant. And every time I tell that to somebody, you know, it's such a relief. They're not going to have to account for it on taxes. But payments are different for owners and tenants, so we're going to dive into that on the next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about the owners first. So for a property owner, when Joe's group is coming out with an offer to purchase, we're also coming out with a statement of eligibility, which I mentioned earlier, and the potential for a purchase additive. And that's additional money that can go towards purchasing and occupying a decent, safe, and sanitary home. And it's going to be based on comparable housing in the area. And prices are going up right now. So most of the time, not every time, we're going to need to kick in additional money to be there at closing. So at the offer, they're going to know that amount. We also, for owners, it talks about incidental expenses. This is closing costs, basically. We reimburse many of the closing costs, most of the closing costs to purchase the new home. So that could be the appraisal fee, home inspection fee, survey, title search, title insurance, on and on. It just seems like it's ever growing, but we reimburse nearly all of them. Usually we're bringing the check at closing. And there is a mortgage interest differential payment. Sometimes we run into a situation where the rates have gone up and they had a lower rate. Well, we got to account for that. And there's a payment that we can do for that. Right now, that's not really an issue because the rates are so low. All right, next slide, please. So for the tenant side, you know, like I said, before the Uniform Act, the tenant was just kind of out of luck. There really wasn't anything. But with the Uniform Act of 1970, they have benefits, significant benefits, because we're going to look at a replacement housing payment for them as well. We're going to look at what they're currently paying for rent and how much it's going to cost to rent a replacement. And that could be significantly more, especially right now with rental prices increasing so rapidly. But income is also a factor if it's considered low income. And so what we do is, you know, the government doesn't want more than 30% of money going toward housing and utilities. That's it, 30%. So if they're low income, we're looking at the lesser of 30% of their income versus what they're paying for rent and utilities currently. And whatever the difference is, we're going to make that up for 42 months. We're going to pay the difference 42 months, usually in a lump sum. Once they rent a new place and moved in, they get that payment. And that payment can also be converted. If they don't want to rent something, they want to become homeowners, we can do a down payment supplement, which is an opportunity to take all of that money and convert it into becoming a homeowner. And that's one of the best things we get to do. I love taking somebody from being a tenant to being a homeowner. Next slide, please. And before I go into this one, I think I need to mention, we really do work very closely throughout the whole process with them. I would say hand-holding, whatever is that they need to help them get through. If they need real estate professionals, if they need assistance if they need to be driven, they'll come into my car and I'll drive them around to see properties. Whatever is needed to help them find somewhere. If we can connect them to housing programs that will help them as first-time home buyers, we're gonna make those resources available. Next slide. There we go. Oh, sorry, Joe.
I'm out of control. Sorry.
That's all right. So moving cost reimbursement. I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory. Homeowners and tenants are going to have this. It's the same for each. But there's two different ways to do it. You can move yourself. If you move yourself, you can either do it based on receipts, which hardly anybody does, or you can do a fixed payment, which is based on a room count, how many rooms you have, and we can add additional rooms for outdoor areas, or they use a room as storage and it's just so much stuff we need to add rooms and increase the amount. And if they don't want to move themselves and they want to do what I would do, which is hire a commercial mover, we can do that as well, and we'll pay the mover directly. They don't have to come out of pocket at all. They'll actually pack everything up for them, move it to the new location, unpack everything, and we'll insure that move too for the full replacement cost of the move. Next slide. Well, so we're nearing the end of the presentation. This is an important thing as well as the relocation appeal. I mean, when we try to get everything taken care of here on a district level, but sometimes there are some gray areas, and sometimes people do appeal or need to file an appeal. They don't agree with something that's been decided on the district level. Well, there's a mechanism in place for them to appeal any decision to central office. And, it's not, for me, it's not a combative thing. I mean, I'll help them. We are to help them if they need assistance with completing the appeal. And ultimately, if central office, they can reverse our decision, or they can uphold our decision, and then they have the right to go to an administrative hearing if they'd like to. Next slide. So that's the end of my presentation. We are going to open it up for a question and answer. I would just caution you, I'm here really as a consultant speaking on relocation, really more of the process than anything. I don't get to make any of those decisions as far as that are hot button topic type decisions, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and Joe could probably touch on some of those other questions, but I want to open it up at this time.
Okay, thank you, Josh. It's very, very informative. Are there questions in the room? We'll start with David Bailey.
Yes, Mr. Murphy. My question has to do with the process, specifically with the appraisals. And I have a couple questions, so bear with me. The first question is the appraisal done by a third party, or is there an in-house appraiser that performs these appraisals for the government?
That's a great question. The appraisals are done by a third party, an outside contractor, contracted real estate appraiser.
Perfect. And then for the purposes of those appraisals, as it's listed on the appraisal, is it listed for a regular for purchase and sale appraisal, or is it listed as some type of eminent domain use appraisal?
The Florida statute requires us to appraise for market value. So the appraisal comes as a market value appraisal.
Okay, and then the third question, as you go into some of the lower income areas, or this has to do with race basically, there's been different issues with appraisals being the result of the appraisal for some homeowners, typically those of African American homeowners, being appraised at lower values than say white or Caucasians. My question is there anything or is there anybody within the government that accounts for that to make sure that there's no disparity with values with the appraisals?
We have, I've heard that kind of talk. I'm not aware of that. In the 30 years I've been involved in this, I'm not aware of that happening at all. But to answer your question, every appraisal goes through an in-house review, and we do look at consistency of values across the project.
Perfect. And then the last question that I have for you, are those appraisals from the homeowner, are they up for challenge at all? I know you mentioned the attorney, and I'm assuming that's what the attorney is used for, but is the government opened up to some type of appeal process when it comes to or challenge for the appraisal? And this is just all from my knowledge. But
I'm not sure I understand your question. You're talking about when they get their own appraisal and it doesn't agree with our appraisal?
That's part of it. So if you do an appraisal and is it just, my question is, can it be appealed? If the homeowner agree with that.
So let me answer that the best I can. The appraisal technically can't be appealed. If they get an appraisal of their own and it disagrees with our appraisal, then we look at the strengths of their appraisal, we look at the strengths of ours, and we negotiate. If they think that our appraisal is too low and they can give us some justification, that's what the negotiation process is about. Nobody walks in and says, hey, I've got a $50,000 appraisal of your property, and that's the state's offer, and that's all we're giving you, take it or leave it. That simply doesn't happen. What we do is we say, hey, we've got an appraisal for $50,000 for your property, and we'd like to offer that to you as compensation for the state to buy it.
I'm sorry, in the expenses that you provide, you do provide, you cover the cost for the homeowner themselves to go and do a third party or independent?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Amy, you have a question?
Yes, I have several questions. Joseph, first and foremost, thank you. I am the one that called you. I'm the one that sort of stirred the pot on this particular topic. And just for clarification, it was because I have a major gap in understanding as far as how we can vote on a TIP amendment for a specific amount before we actually.
I'm really having trouble understanding you.
Okay, is this better?
Much. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
And excuse me for having my mask off. But so I am the one that did independent research. I did use Zillow, but I also consulted with real estate professionals in the area who would have been doing for years to appraise these homes. And one of the gaps that I have in my understanding, which is one of the reasons behind this research that I did, is because I don't understand how we are voting on a TIP amendment for a specific amount of money, which I believe was $2.5 million, when appraisals for these homes haven't really been done yet, according to your diagram that was confirmed. And, you know, the homeowner, as my understanding, has the right to hire an attorney to contest the amount of the appraisal, and then a mediator or a jury decides. So I guess the gap that I'm looking to fill with my first question is 2.5 million with the amount that, if, you know, maxed out with the report that I turned over in June. There's only like $1.5 million left, and that doesn't seem to me to be enough. Maybe, you know, I don't know much about this process, to cover any attorney's costs if there are residents who contest the appraisal. So I'm looking to understand more about how the ask for the money before the appraisal works. And then what happens if it goes over what was asked for, if the tenant or the tenants, or I'm sorry, the homeowners contest. Does that make sense?
So what we do in our cost estimates, we factor in elevators. We've been doing this to where we kind of know how many property owners are going to get appraiser or attorneys. We kind of know about what percentages of above the appraised amount we're gonna be settling at. We don't just walk in and give one guy $1.5 million because he says he wants it. And all I can tell you is all that stuff is factored into the cost estimate that I assume was used to set the budget. What your actual budget is for this project and what has been spent and what's left, I don't have any working knowledge of that. And as far as what would happen if there wasn't enough money to complete the project, that would be a different pay grade than mine.
Yeah, this is really the money to, in my understanding of the TIP amendment, was for right-of-way acquisition, specifically to buy this property. Do I not have that understanding correctly?
Let me jump in if I may, Mr. Chairman. Joe, I think what Amy's referring to is we had a DOT come forward and ask for an amendment to our transportation improvement program to purchase some additional properties around the downtown interchange. I think it was 7 or 8 properties that were not, I guess we're a late addition to the project, is the best way to put it. And I think Amy's right. I think the amount was somewhere around 2.3, 2.5 million. So I think her question was just, how do you know that before you actually engage in negotiations with property owners?
In fact, you have to, you estimate it just exactly the way they estimate a construction budget before we build a project. We estimate the hard costs, we estimate the soft costs, we use factors to multiply it for time, and basically what you're looking at, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's 5 or 6 houses, residential houses that we're buying for $2.5 million. So that by that math is close to $500,000 a piece.
Does that include attorney's fees if they contest, or is that a separate budget?
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, again, I don't know what's written into the agreement, but the cost estimate takes into account appraisal fees, attorney fees, increases over the appraised amount. Now, does it hit everyone exactly right? No, but it's a fairly good estimate.
Okay, thank you. My second question is for Joshua. Mr. Fernandez, who is a committee member who probably has questions after me, had brought up in one of our prior meetings that FDOT owns homes that are boarded up and have the ability to be rehabilitated. So I guess my question is, how does that play into the bigger picture here when you are planning on relocating people? Do you all have provisions to help homeowners fix up the houses that you have in stock? I'm interested to know a bit more about that.
I mean, certainly that is a possibility. If somebody wanted to purchase a home that needed to be rehabilitated, that can be done, absolutely. I mean, it would have to be brought up to decent, safe, and sanitary standards, but absolutely, that can be done. When we do our process, I'm going to go out, the relocation agent's going to go out and prior to the offer and find 3 comparable homes in the area for sale that meet decent, safe, and sanitary guidelines. And that's going to be the basis for our replacement housing payment. But however they want to use that is really up to them, as long as it's decent, safe, and sanitary housing at the end of the day.
Hey, let me address that too a little bit with the boarded up houses. We've got some agreements with the city and with the barrio. And in past projects where we bought houses, we've done a whole lot with the historical society to document what we bought. We work hard to take, either move the house out, and we've done that in an agreement with the city. We moved, I think, 60 houses and remodeled them back to historic specifications and put local people in them. The ones that, quite frankly, the houses that are left that are boarded up are the ones that just are pretty well deteriorated to the point nobody's interested in them. We do constantly try and sell the houses. We try and get them moved off. We try and save the historic stuff. That's in accordance with our agreement. We've got written agreements with the city and the barrio down there in the community. But as far as taking relocatees, if one of them wanted to move a house, we could talk about that. Most of them are we don't dictate anything to them. We listen to what they want. If they want to buy a condo at the beach and move over there, they can. If they want to buy a house in the neighborhood, they can. If they want to move in with Great Aunt Esther in New York, they can. We don't dictate what they do. We try and help them reach their, whatever they want to do when they move.
Thank you both.
Yep.
Other questions? Nick Lawler.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, so far.
Very good. Nicholas Glover, Hart representative on the board here, and I think I saw Rick had his hand up too. You can imagine that, whenever there's a chance to protect our neighbors, we get really interested and engaged. So that's where this is coming from, of course. So thank you, maybe, for that. My question is kind of along the lines of David's question, as well as it relates to value. Some of these folks bought these houses years and years and years ago because they knew that Tampa was probably going to be even shinier gem than it already is. So if you make an offer to someone and you've looked at a couple other comparable houses in the area, assuming that there are some, what happens in an area like the Heights, for example, where inventory is almost non-existent, and we're basically moving these individuals from a house they've been in maybe for years, and there isn't a suitable alternative? What happens then? You mentioned that there's an additive line item. Is that where that could potentially make folks whole if there is not a suitable alternative within a even 1 mile, 2 mile area? I'm just looking for some more concrete answers as to how we can best make people whole in a situation like we're in now, where prices are skyrocketing. And let's say if you are giving someone $500,000, there's not a whole lot they can do with that in certain neighborhoods.
Right. Now, that's exactly what the replacement housing payment is for, is to make them whole. It's if their house, say their house is run down, it's not the nicest one in the street. Say their house is not decent, safe, and sanitary. They've got holes in the floor. They've got bad plumbing. It doesn't appraise out very well. We have to find them a comparable replacement dwelling. That doesn't mean that we can find them a house in Lakeland or up in Pasco County. If they're down in the community, we try and relocate them right into that community if that's what they want. So if their house appraises for $50,000, and a comparable house costs $100,000, that's that supplemental payment is the additional $50,000 plus closing costs, plus incidental expenses, plus moving expenses, plus. Josh, straighten me out if I say anything wrong.
If I can add a follow-up, so in a traditional, homeowner purchasing something from the bank is who owns the appraisal, to David's point. And usually that appraisal, the guidance is about 90 days. I guess it could change. Is that still going to be the case with these appraisals? It's basically for a 90-day kind of window, assuming that the market doesn't go through the floor or through the ceiling. Is that accurate?
We update appraisals as needed. We take time into account. If we make an offer in December and we're trying to settle in June, we may get an update on it to see what the market's done in 6 months. We certainly consider time, and especially in market times like we're dealing with right now.
Excellent. The last thing I would just ask you to do is, in some of these areas where the market we know is going to improve drastically over the next year, 2, 3 years, for individuals to have the benefit of meeting with either city planners who may have a pretty broad understanding of some of the plans that will be going on around the city, so that can help make them aware of the best value accretion opportunities for them. They aren't just selecting a place that's available when they could potentially see some of the projects that are going throughout Hillsborough County and make a better decision for them and their families. I was just encouraging you all to think about offering that as an add-on to what you already are offering.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Nick Fernandez, you have some questions, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
You good? Okay. My question relates to collateral properties, properties adjacent to the right-of-way properties that have been targeted. Let's assume hypothetically I live on 14th Avenue on the north side of Interstate 4, and DOT intends to take 5 of my neighboring properties in order to increase the width of the highway. I come to you and say, when you do that, I'm a next door neighbor. When you do that, my property value is going to be diminished. I'm going to have to deal with construction issues in the immediate future and then ongoing issues, essentially in perpetuity. You're diminishing the value of my property. What rights do I have vis-a-vis that right-of-way taking? Can I make a claim, for instance, for constructive eviction or taking, and ask the DOT to take my property as well, although you don't need to take it for the right-of-way expansion?
Typically, we're held to necessity. You're an attorney, you know the law better than I do as far as that goes.
Well,
there's
that's not
always
really
an inverse condemnation if we damage as a result of the project, but you certainly know the law better than I do.
Well, I'm not an eminent domain lawyer, so no, that particular assumption is incorrect. I'm asking as a matter of experience. I've got to imagine this has happened before.
We have bought hardship properties before. We don't as a matter of course.
And how do you define a hardship property?
It depends on the individual owner and their circumstances.
Can I ask who's speaking to identify themselves? I know
I'm sorry?
Who's responding to Rick's question?
Joe Murphy?
Thank you, Joe.
Yes, sir.
Now go ahead with your answer. I'm sorry. I want to be sure the record is covered.
No problem. No problem. If there's a situation that exists that it makes sense for us to buy a property and the property owner and then the adjacent property owner wants to sell it, we consider that. We consider it all the time. Many times we buy whole properties where the right-of-way needs are a piece of the property because it just makes sense to the owner to sell the whole property for his needs. And if we can justify a need, we can buy it.
I can add something. This is Josh Eaton, by the way, presented earlier. I'm, by the way, no expert in this area at all, but I do know there is an inverse condemnation process as well. So we prefer, of course, I'm sure, for them to approach us first. But if for whatever reason we didn't want to do it, they could potentially hire an attorney themselves and initiate an inverse condemnation process. Of course, that's not something we necessarily want to see, but that is something that does occur on occasion.
Well, for instance, down near on Grace Street, down near the West Shore area, I can't get you any closer than that, but I know it's around Grace Street. We bought 6 houses we had no need to, because when we went in and put the trail in down there, the property owners, I don't know whether it was traffic or what, but I know there were 6 of them down there that we bought over the course of several years that the property owners asked us to buy them, and we did. It's just not something we typically do.
Who would I call about that, just out of curiosity, if I want to sell you my house? You want to give me your number? I'll give you a holler.
813-975-6228.
Okay. Give you a holler. We'll have some coffee.
Sounds great.
Yep. Any questions from any other committee members online? I'm not seeing any.
I have one.
I'm sorry, David Bailey.
Yeah. Mr. Murphy, one more question to Mr. Glover's point. For that additional payment, is there a limit, or is there a percentage for that additional payment? In the example you gave, you bought the house for $50,000. If they were displaced outside of the neighborhood or wanted to go outside the neighborhood and bought a house for $100,000, that additional payment was an additional $50,000. Is there a limit on that, or how is that determined as to how much above that $50,000 they could use? Or
I'm gonna let Josh Eaton answer that one.
So, yeah, I mean, technically there is a limit, and once it reaches that limit, it enters into what's called last resort housing. I think 31,000 is the actual limit right now for a homeowner, or right around that amount. But I mean, almost all the time, not all the time, but very often we're exceeding that amount. So no, in reality, there is no limit. There is no limit. It's whatever it's going to take. Because I mean, we've had situations where a property, people are living in a home that the improvements have no value anymore. It's the only values in the land. It's not a living situation that they really ought to be in. In those kind of situations, we have significant purchase additives. So yeah, there is no limit in reality.
Let me follow that up too. Josh is, I've worked in relocation. Josh is a career relocation. And I know 30 or 40 career relocation agents. Their job, they take it as almost a religion to help the people. The whole thought process behind a relocation agent is to get every dollar they can possibly get to the relocatee. And they're fabulous at doing it. It's a neat deal because it's one of those few times in the state and the right of way process where you're really trying to get money to the people that need it and to make them whole. And in 30 years, I've never seen a relocatee end up in a worse situation than they started with. Josh will tell you the same thing.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate the presentation. These are all good questions. Amy, if you have an additional question, can you direct it directly to each for one of these individuals? Or is it really quick?
It's really quick.
Okay.
And it's something that we can come back to if needed. But again, I would like to know, and perhaps this is more an MPO or a planning commission question. So if we find that the estimate for the initial tip was wrong for relocation, what happens? Does it come back for the additional money on the tip? So again, we can postpone that question,
Okay.
but I would like to have more clarity on that.
Okay, that's a great question. I think we will ask staff to help us find out from DOT what happens if there's an excess once the tip amendment has been approved. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. It's a good subject, and I'm sure there's lots more we can cover. We welcome you back again in the future.
Thank you much. We appreciate the opportunity.
We have one remaining item on our status reports, and I'm told that we can ask Mr. Clarendon to help us with this one. It is the stormwater evacuation forecast. Allison was going to give a presentation, but I think Rich is going to help us get an abbreviated version. Is that right?
Yes. Good afternoon. I know I'm probably standing between you and lunch, and I have just a really brief. Yes.
Yeah, I think we're going to, instead of deferring it, I think what I'm going to do is just, if you could just show the web location for the project and
yes.
Refer people to the part about public engagement and the
yes,
workshop.
That's exactly what I want to do. Richard, if you could go down to, you can click on public engagement, and I just want you to show that screen where open house is listed. So the purpose of the briefing is just to let you know that the storm evacuation shelter in place study has started. We've been doing data collection and working with emergency management, the jurisdictions, and the Regional Planning Council. On August 25th, Rich, if you go scroll down just a bit, there you go. On August 25th, there's going to be a virtual open house from 4:30 to 6:30. It's going to be 2 parts, so we'll repeat a presentation 1 hour into this open house to give background information and also to launch an online survey that will be up on our website for about a month and a half. So I'm inviting you to take a look at this background information and hoping you can pass this information on to anyone who may be interested. We really would like to hear from the public. We can also send you some information if you want to forward a specific email with all this information in it. And in a nutshell, that's all the background information about the study that was approved by the MPO board is on our website, and it's also on our calendar for August 25th. So I hope that was quick enough. And you can contact me if you have any questions.
Rich, you want to add to that?
Yep.
Allison, I apologize for running so late. So,
It's been a long morning.
Long morning. For the committee, is there any new business or any unfinished business that you care to discuss today? Yes.
So I don't mean to hold this any longer, but I just wanted to say that this is my last meeting. Unfortunately, I did take a new position, so I won't be able to accommodate the meetings in my schedule anymore because it's a field position and it's in St. Pete. But I just wanted to let everybody know that I was grateful to have been on for the few months that I was, and to thank everybody for always being so welcoming and kind.
Good. Well,
Thanks for being here. Congratulations.
thanks for your time. Congratulations on the new position. We'll miss you.
Thank you.
Anything else for anybody? Anybody online have anything they need to raise as new business? Give it an hour. Yes, Rick?
Couple real quick things. Under unfinished business, we had a discussion or a question last time about what projects are not subject to review and change in the TIP. And it's basically those projects that have already entered into the design phase. And there's a list of those that's included in your packet that we pulled from the current TIP. So we can talk about that more at a future meeting if you'd like. And the only other thing I would mention is that we did hear back from Justin Willits, who's with HART, about the bus shelters or bus stops, and he's referred us to Linda Crescentini at HART, and there's a comment in the chat box about that. So again, if we'd like to talk about that at a future meeting, we can try to arrange that where you can get with Linda directly.
Okay, good. It's good follow-up. Beatrice, we'll miss you. Thanks again. If there's no other business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Sure. So what are you